This episode of the Cult Popture podcast was brought to you by our Patreon. If you want to tell us which films we should watch, listen to up to 2 extra exclusive podcasts a month, or give us something to discuss in our new post-credit scenes at the end of each episode, then please consider joining the cult and donating at www.patreon.com/cultpopture. Alright, Richard, let's get this out of the way first. For this entire podcast, however long it may be, we will not do an Arnold Schwarzenegger impression. That is tough. The challenge. What do you think?
Can we do other impressions?
I think so. I think we should jam-pack this episode of the podcast with every other impression or funny voice we can think of that is distinctly not a Schwarzenegger impression. The lowest hanging of the low-hanging accent impression.
Okay, let's do some accent.
I'll be back. Because it's so tempting, and I feel like what must be the 500th podcast ever recorded on the subject of Terminator or Arnold Schwarzenegger in general, you've heard everyone can do it. We can do it, I assure you, but we're not going to.
It's one thing, because it's interesting, just speaking of impressions, maybe like 10 years ago, I like really prided myself in being quite good at impressions and would work on them and get better. And now I find it so much funnier to be really bad at them. And it's like the cultural shift in the last, 10 or so years, how it's become like the cool thing is to brag about having a really small penis rather than a really big one. And I think there's something more humble about being really bad at impressions. So we agreed on this earlier in the week to do this as a challenge for this podcast. But boy, howdy, have I been doing the worst Arnold Schwarzenegger impressions all week leading up to this, just to get them out of my system.
If one of us does do it, we lose a point or something. There could be some kind of... Okay. We'll let out the people on our Discord can just decide. In fact, if anyone from the Discord is listening, if anyone, I know they will be, if we do it and we don't realize it and aren't caught up on it, I want you guys to note, Gas Cadet, this is your job. Use a Gas Cadet. This is your job to note down if we ever make an Arnold Schwarzenegger impression. The crown jewel in my impression crown is my Hank Hill from King of the Hill.
Oh yeah.
This is my Hank Hill. We're Christians and we don't do that. Dang it, Bobby. What? No. I sell propane. All right.
Mine is Kermit the Frog, and he goes, "Hello, welcome to the Muppet Show."
No, you just did it.
What?
Or is that just an intentionally bad?
That's my Kermit.
Okay, I don't know if I like this loophole.
I set it up perfectly as well, so you go back and listen. I'm bad at impressions.
Welcome to Film Franchise Fornights on the Cult Popture podcast, everybody. My name is AJ, and I'm joined by Richard. And this is a podcast where, for going on in our 5th season now, we've been watching every film franchise known to man. Some you've never heard of.
Some man didn't even know about.
Yep, and some you have heard of, like The Terminator, which is the franchise that we are finally, in year 4, season 5, we're finally doing the Terminator franchise, which is one of those big, significant ones that when you're talking about film franchises, you can't not talk about the Terminator. Which includes 6 films, starting in 1984, with the most recent entry being only last year in 2019. The films include The Terminator from 1984, Terminator 2 Judgment Day from 1991, Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines from 2003, Terminator Salvation in 2009, Terminator Genesis in 2015, and Terminator Dark Fate in 2019. Often heralded as one of the most iconic performances of Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Terminator series also boasts a cast of several other well-known actors, from Linda Hamilton to Robert Patrick, the two most well-known
Linda
actors.
Hamilton of the Terminator fame and Robert Patrick of T2.
But you've also got Christian Bale, Amelia Clarke. Who else have you got? Bryce Dallas Howard. Anton
Mackenzie
Yelchin
Davis.
shows up. Jai Courtney. Courtney B. Vance.
Mm.
So the franchise also boasts some interesting directors, including game-changing filmmaker James Cameron and James Cameron wannabe McG. While the series contains arguably some of the greatest action blockbusters of all time, it also contains some of the most okayest. It is somewhat important to the ecosystem of franchises, as the latter 4 movies in the series are all attempts at being the definitive third chapter in the franchise, and all 4 approach this challenge with very different techniques. It's very exciting to talk about. We've not had a franchise like this, where we've had franchises where they've done the reset and they've done the ignore past sequel. We've never seen the franchise do it this many times. So
Godzilla did it.
That's true, but Godzilla had more of a congruity to it because there were like errors, and Godzilla felt like it was making an artistic choice. Terminator feels like 4 years after the last film, they're like, no, that wasn't very good. Let's try that again. So, Richard, the first one we're going to talk about today is The Terminator from 1984, directed by James Cameron. Do you know what this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
100.
It has 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. Terminator 1. And what is The Terminator about?
All right, so The Terminator is about this Terminator, which is a futuristic, robot.
A cybernetic organism covered in human flesh. I don't know. He
Yeah.
says it cooler than I do. I can't do an impression, and thus I can't relate.
How does he say it, AJ? Who is sent back in time to kill Sarah Connor because she is going to give birth to John Connor, who is going to be the leader of the human resistance. So Skynet, which is, I'm sure you'll hear that name a lot in this podcast. They are like the machine, the theoretical machine that you would rage against in the future, and so yeah, that's one sort of storyline. And then at the same time, Kyle Reese is sent back by the human resistance to protect Sarah Connor because he fell in love with a picture of her because he knows John Connor in the future. And then they end up falling in love, and, one thing leads to another, and they sleep together, which is the conception of John Connor. It's where he's conceived. And then also, of course, they defeat the Terminator by crushing him. Will it crush? What's the name of that YouTube channel?
Welcome to the Hydraulic Press
the
channel.
Hydraulic
That is
Press
not.
channel.
That is a Russian impression, just in case anyone thinks I'm really bad at Austrian. With a Hydra, they crush the Terminator, who at this point is just a stop-motion animated metal skeleton with a hydraulic press. The Kyle Reese dies in the final battle, and Sarah Connor, who started the story as a lowly waitress, is now somewhat battle-hardened, ready to give birth to her son and face the future, which is almost certainly the AI uprising of robotic death.
Yeah.
This is such. Had you seen this before?
I had seen the first hour of it. I think I distinctly remember watching up until the point where Arnold has to take his face off to repair himself, which is I'm sure very good special effects for 1984. But yeah, so it was like a movie night that I'd watched that at, and I had to leave or something like that. And then that was my only exposure to Terminator up until this last week. I had never seen any of the sequels.
Wow, okay, interesting. So I'd seen the first 2, and 3 was in the recesses of my mind somewhere, but I purposely never saw the other ones because I felt, even before this podcast started, one day I will watch all of these.
Yeah,
maybe I won't.
It's one of those things that by the time something like Dark Fate came out, it was like, well, I don't want to watch it now and then have it in 2 weeks for the podcast. I tend not to watch film franchise movies on my downtime anymore. It's ruined it for me.
No, absolutely. So I'd seen this one once before. I've seen Terminator 2 twice before this podcast. But Terminator 1 I'd only seen once. And man, this is such a filmmaker's movie. That's why it's 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's imperfect and it's schlocky and it's scrappy, but it's so practical and basic and it's impossible to not be charmed by. You know, like the story's pretty good, but the special effects, the you know, ground up the, what am I trying to say? From the, you know, they didn't have a lot of
grassroots
resources.
Kind of,
Grassroots, thank you. The grassroots filmmaking in this is really inspiring. So that's what I think of it. I think it's very cool. I think it's very good. And James Cameron is a director whose name I know. So, in Rome, Italy, I don't know if you knew that was in Italy, during the release of Piranha 2, The Spawning, which was James Cameron's first film, he fell ill and had a dream about a metallic torso holding kitchen knives dragging itself from an explosion. So coupled with this and an inspiration from John Carpenter's Halloween in 1978, another series we've covered, on a low budget, Cameron used the dream as a launching pad to write a slasher-style film. Cameron's agent disliked the Terminator early concept of horror, of it being just a straight-up horror, and requested he work on something else. And after this, what do you think James Cameron did?
He said, "Oh, well."
And he fired his agent.
Wow.
So yeah, it is somewhat serendipitous that we are arriving at the Terminator franchise merely one fortnight after our Freddy vs. Jason, escapade.
Yeah.
Triple episode. Because, you know, we've covered Halloween and we've covered Hellraiser and we've covered Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Freddy vs. Jason and A Nightmare on Elm Street. And it's not hard to see the T800 or the Model T01, I think, as an honorary member of that iconic 80s horror movie villain club. Terminator is typically more seen as an action franchise, but the first one is quite scary in some places.
Yeah, man. Didn't scare me.
No, neither. Fuck. So Sylvester Stallone and Mel Gibson were offered the Terminator role, but both turned it down. And in what has become a staple of funny and ironic movie trivia in the age of IMDb and Empire magazine, the studio suggested O.J. Simpson for the role, but James Cameron did not feel that Simpson would be a believable killer.
Oh.
An anecdote for the ages. One of the best anecdotes of in movie history.
And maybe it's not true. Who knows? And that's a fun thing to just make up. Like
I thought maybe you were referencing the fact that O.J. Simpson was found not guilty, and that's what you're like. Maybe it's not true.
No, but it is funny as well that in Last Action Hero, Arnold Schwarzenegger's film from 1993, Sylvester Stallone does kind of play the Terminator in the end, because the main character goes into the world of an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie called Jack Slater 4. And in the world of the movie, because Arnold Schwarzenegger doesn't exist because he's too busy playing Jack Slater, there's like a poster where it has Sylvester Stallone as the Terminator.
Interesting. That's really
and
cool.
It's like, and so like that's his way of like proving that he's not that, you know, it's a movie. It's like, look, this is supposed to be played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's like, no, it's Stallone. He's great.
Nice. Well, Schwarzenegger was actually originally considered for the role of Kyle Reese. And James Cameron was never really happy with this idea and actually planned apparently to pick a fight with, I've written Arnold Schwarzenegger. That's incredible. I've misspelled Schwarzenegger as Schwarzenegger.
Nice.
He planned to pick a fight with him in their initial meeting before realizing he'd be perfect for the Terminator. And look, yeah, I get it. I get the appeal. Like, I don't think it would be too shocking or offensive to not regard Arnold Schwarzenegger as a particularly deep or layered actor, a talented actor.
Yeah.
right? So he's not a good actor, is what I'm saying. The story of Arnold Schwarzenegger, which we're not going to talk about here, but it is a fascinating one of essentially an unprecedented body like that was cast in movies because of that reason. Despite having a very off-putting accent to American audiences, and it's like this success story that against all odds he was able to.
Well, we talked about it on the Expendables episode about how it's like this. It's to Austrian audiences as well. His accent's considered like a hillbilly kind of accent, so he doesn't do the dub in German because it would just sound silly having this unstoppable killing machine being like, "Howdy, y'all."
Yeah, no, exactly.
Which is not an Arnold Schwarzenegger impression.
In the same way, I don't know. I feel like The Matrix was written around Keanu Reeves being best when he's understated. Right. I feel like The Terminator is written so that Arnold Schwarzenegger being a quote-unquote bad actor, it adds to the role because it's a very wooden performance that is strange because of the accent. It's almost otherworldly.
Well, and then that comes into it more in the sequels as well.
Exactly.
That it's like he's becoming more human, or he's trying to blend in more. Whereas in this first one, it's a robotic performance.
Yeah. So one of the longest lasting cultural threads of the first two Terminator movies are the famous lines of dialogue which get quoted in sequels, parodies, and every film Schwarzenegger has subsequently appeared in since the Terminator. Lines like, "Come with me if you want to live! Hasta la vista, baby!" And of course, the foreboding, "I'll be back." These lines are, obviously some of the most famous in movie history.
It is interesting how understated "I'll be back" is in the first film, though.
It is, and Schwarzenegger appeared on GQ's Actors Breakdown Their Most Iconic Characters series thing last year. Have you seen that one?
I can't remember.
It is one of my favorite. I don't know if people are into them. I'm very into them, but they got too long, so I stopped watching them. And
now they film them at home, like for some reason. Who cares?
Yeah. Arnold Schwarzenegger did one, and he had this great anecdote, which I think speaks to the talent of James Cameron as a director. Arnold says, and I've written a little note here, don't do the voice. He says, this is I've paraphrased it slightly, but this is mostly the full quote. "When I read the 'I'll be back' line, I said to Jim Cameron, it sounds weird when I say I'll be back. He says, well, how would you say it? And I said, I will be back. And he says, no. I think it sounds better as I'll be back. And I said, but I think it's more machine-like to say I will be back. And he says, look, I don't correct your acting and you don't correct my writing, okay? Just say it 10 times in a row. Just say it and say it and say it and you'll get it right and we can pick one or the other. I understand you don't feel comfortable with I'll, but let's just shoot it. So that's what we did, and I thought it was a clumsy line. I had no idea that anyone would ever repeat it. Then the movie came out and people started coming up to me and saying, say the line. And I said, what line? And they said, I'll be back. So I say, I'll be back. And they say, no. Say it the way you say it in the movie. Now I think it's become one of the most used lines in movie history. Schwarzenegger then goes on to give a surprisingly self-aware analysis of his own accent and why people love his lines of dialogue. But since we aren't doing impressions, it feels pointless to even go into that. But yeah, I think that's James Cameron. We've been talking a lot, and this has accidentally become something we've talked about a lot.
Yeah.
We talked a lot it was on the episode we just did on Patreon for the Nightmare on Elm Street behind the scenes documentary, that like Wes Craven gets it. Yeah. Kevin Feige gets it. James Cameron gets it, man. Like, you look, and what I mean by that is, like, there is a rich knowledge of filmmaking and storytelling behind James Cameron that it is, emphasized by what happens when he's not on board.
Yeah.
When there are non-James Cameron movies, when he's stepped away from an opportunity, as we'll see in the Terminator sequels, you go, man. And then when he even looks at another sequel in development, it has a shred of dignity into it that has not been seen since the 90s.
It is. So, like, I would love to go around and like interview writers and directors who made films that they 100% believed in, that didn't end up very good, or even like I guess it probably happens with like movies that are good, but ask them what you thought the iconic line from this movie is, because I'm sure like
it's a great idea.
there's so many. There's probably movies that have like these lines like "I'll be back" that it's like, oh, we thought everyone was going to be saying like this.
Yeah.
But yeah, that'd be really, because I'm sure everyone on set of like a lot of shitty movies go, oh man, people are gonna love this.
Because I was talking to a friend recently, and I was saying how like imagine you get tasked with. Imagine you're like a Christopher Nolan type, so a director whose work is quite highly regarded by a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
And you get given Terminator 7. And you go, okay, I know storytelling. Everyone loves my films. I can do this. And you try your damnedest to make a good Terminator 3, and everyone is just like, oh, it's not that good. Like, it must be infuriating.
Yeah, I don't think there are any, like, I don't think McG or, like...
No,
even,
but
like,
there are some who had what skirted Terminator sequel that did not end up with it. They would have been a very interesting parallel universe to see some of these films. So you mentioned that the "I'll be back" is understated in Terminator 1. Do you want to go over that and what the context is around it?
Well, it's not like and this is interesting because for 27 years I've pictured what that line delivery would sound like. Although I did see it when I watched it the first time, and I have seen it in clips before. But
and you can't do the accent.
Yeah, but it does sound like, because of the cultural importance that those three words have in that order, you do expect it to be like, I think I always thought it was like at the end of the film, because the other thing is,
as he's
like,
dying,
it's like a promise of a sequel, and that's why it was so big. And that was how I always remembered that, like, because it's been in pub quizzes, like, what film does Arnold Schwarzenegger say, "Hasta la vista, baby"? And it's like, it's from Terminator 2, because in the first one he says, "I'll be back," and then he comes back to say that in the second one. That's how I always remembered which film was which. But, yeah, it's kind of just like, he's at Tech Noir, the club, we're chasing after Sarah Connor, and they just say, like, "You'll have to come back," and he goes, "Okay, I'll be back." Like...
Yeah, that's it. That's what it is. But yeah, it is crazy how it's not even that. I can understand them not expecting it to be popular when they're making it, although I think James Cameron maybe knew.
Yeah.
But it's not even focused on. It carries almost no dramatic weight contextually in the scene. But I think the reason it sticks is because it's an inherently threatening thing to say.
And in that accent as well.
Yeah.
Which we can all hear in our heads. We don't have to do it.
Yeah. Do you have any more thoughts on the first Terminator movie?
It's very good. It's a very good movie.
It's very good. What was your favourite scene?
When he says, "I'll be back." Actually, I will say this, though. So, and this is kind of leading into, as I'm presuming we're about to move on to Terminator 2. So Terminator 2 has quite a famous twist in it, which I'll get to that in a sec. But the reveal that Kyle Reese is John Connor's father, I somehow went my whole life without knowing that.
Oh, really?
Like, I knew who Kyle Reese was, I knew who John Connor was, I knew who Sarah Connor was. I've known, like, a lot about these movies, and it's one of these movies that's funny to watch now because I've seen every single scene of this movie through references and like Simpsons sight gags and whatnot. But for somehow it never entered my pop culture knowledge that Kyle Reese is John Connor's father.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So was that a nice surprise?
It was. I was like, oh. And then my immediate thought was, that's crazy, I didn't know
how you and I have programmed our brains to think about movies.
Yeah.
Like that review that said we care more about the IMDb page than the actual movie, and I was like, that's a good review to me. I think that's a great way to look at the podcast.
Yeah, it really hurt my feelings.
What do you think of the prosthetic effects in it? So there's a part where the Terminator like takes apart his face and pulls a bung eye out, and it's very clearly a fake head. Do you think that still stands up?
Well, it's one of those things. Like, obviously, it does look dated, but there is, like, if this is actual, living tissue put on top of an endoskeleton, a metal endoskeleton, it is like if you ripped off part of that, the face would get looser, so it would look like it's not stuck on properly. It's not like pulled as tight. So it's like there's an in-universe explanation for why it does look a little bit uncanny valley-y. So watching it, there is like a quaintness to it. It's like, oh, that's the best you could do at the time. But then at the same time, it's not remotely like movie ruining or like even really taking you out of the scene, other than going, huh.
Yeah, I think and there's other things I like about it are like it's small things like the character of Sarah Connor rescues herself in the end. She's not saved by Kyle Reese. And, this was 1984, so no one's really expecting feminist icons at this stage. Yeah. And she kind of...
Well, thank God she can have a son, because that's much more important than her.
Yeah. Well, but they almost deconstruct that in one of the part 3s as well, though. And I have a bit more to say about Sarah Connor that I think will add to that. So that's the Terminator. Arnie's the iconic villain, the Terminator, and it ends promising. It's hard to imagine there was ever a point where Terminator 2 was not planned.
Yeah.
Because this movie is all about something happening that you aren't seeing yet.
Right, yeah.
So, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, sometimes referred to only as T2 in marketing, like promotionally, it was referred to as T2, but nowhere official is it called T2. That came out in 1991, also directed by James Cameron. Do you know what this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
It's not 100%. But I think I saw, when I was looking at a list of 100 rated films the other day for some reason, that the 3D re-release has 100% of Rotten Tomatoes. But it's like, it'd be like mid to low or mid 90s.
Yeah, it's 93, which I think is very interesting because I think this is much better than the first one. I think this is easily the best one.
I think, and this is a hot take here that I've been telling all my workmates, I think this is one of the best movies ever made.
I do too.
Certainly one of the best blockbusters.
Yeah, and one of the best sequels, which is especially relevant. I've written a bit more about that later that we can get to. I wonder if there is just an inherent sequel bias, especially in the 90s when every sequel sucked. Like, if it's just, and maybe because it's a bit more experimental, that invites a bit more divisiveness.
Well, I also think that reviewing films would have changed a lot between 1984 and 1991. We talk a lot about Rotten Tomatoes and how like it tends to favor older movies because they weren't reviewed as much. And I think there is a little bit of that here, that if you're, there's probably like 10 times as many reviewers between 1984 and 1981. 1991. And so I think that's probably a little bit of it. And, there's people that loved the first Terminator that would have just gone in being like, this one isn't going to be as good. I don't care. I don't care. Yeah. Because, you have like 8 years to sit on it.
So what is Terminator 2 Judgment Day, one of the best movies ever made? What is it about?
So, it's now a few years later.
It's actually, I believe it's set in 95, despite being made in 91.
So it's John Connor has been born. He's about almost 10 years old, roughly.
I think he's 12.
And
years old?
He is so Sarah Connor is locked up. She's institutionalized, and John Connor is living with foster parents. Now, we have two Terminators come into the present day of the film from the future. One is Arnold Schwarzenegger, who, evil from the first movie. The other one is played by Robert Patrick, and that's a more advanced model Terminator, and he is a cop, so obviously, cops are good guys. But anyway, the big kind of reveal in this film is, so obviously, again, they're trying to kill John Connor because he's going to be the leader of the resistance. But the reveal in this film, not too far into it, before halfway, is that Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator is a good guy now. He's a reprogrammed version of the T-800 who has been sent back in time to protect John Connor this time. And so it ends up becoming they they break Sarah Connor out of the institution, and they end up creating this weird little family to take down the TU-1000, right? Which is Robert Patrick's on.
So it's specific. About halfway through the movie, it turns, and what it becomes about is actually stopping Judgment Day from ever happening.
Yeah.
So destroying the machine that will one day become a Terminator, thus preventing
the start of Skynet. It's because it's Cyberdyne Industries at that point.
Yeah, run by a man named Miles Dyson, who would go on to create the Dyson Airblade. But I think, so it sort of becomes about stopping the future, because Skynet is supposed to be a company that makes automated missile defense systems that become so smart they turn against.
Yeah, it's like an AI. It's the typical, same as like Age of Ultron. It's like an AI that decides that humans aren't worth living.
No, I don't think it's deciding that. I think it's the paperclip problem. Do you know about that?
From Microsoft Word.
Yeah,
do you need help writing that?
No, the paperclip. I think it's called the paperclip problem. It's what a lot of like futurists have deemed as the biggest threat from AI. Is, say you create a machine that its sole purpose is to make paperclips, and you say you turn off the like limiter that says it's going to listen to humans, and you say do whatever you need to do to make paperclips. It's going to eventually run out of resources to make paperclips, so it's going to start ravaging the world's resources for paperclips, and then once the world is out of resources for paperclips, it's going to find a way to go off planet onto another planet and ravage that planet for resources to make paperclips.
Who needs that many paperclips?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't know why it's making paperclips. It just knows that's what it needs to do. So I think it's hostile. I don't think it's a protecting humans thing. I think Skynet is hostile.
Yeah. That's what it like. That's what I said.
Anyway,
decides that humans aren't like that are inherently evil, and so like it's to set out to eliminate them. I use the Age of Ultron comparison not because it's a AI designed to protect the world,
right? Okay,
but because it turns against humans after learning a little bit about us. So just talking about the big twist in this movie, which famously was revealed in the second trailer for the film, because it had like quite a cool first teaser, and then the second trailer for it had the get down moment. Right. Which, if you've seen the movie, you know that's the kind of the reveal.
Get down, he says. That's what the Arnold Schwarzenegger says.
And so it's one of the most famous twists in movie history. It's kind of like just common knowledge that Arnie isn't the bad guy in the second film. Do you know, I only found that twist out like 6 to 12 months ago. If we'd done this franchise like a year ago, that would have blown my mind.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah.
I don't remember finding this out.
Like I remember like
told
it was like
to me as a matter of fact.
Yeah, it was something about like it was a Reddit post about like, trailers spoiling too much these days, and one of them was like, well, you have to remember that in 1991 Terminator 2 spoiled that Arnie's the good guy, and I was like, oh, okay.
That's interesting that you didn't know that.
I think I must have known somehow. I think maybe it wouldn't have actually blown my mind, but I didn't know that it was like a twist in that movie, because obviously due to what I've seen in the trailers of like 5 and 6, it's like he's clearly on their side somehow. So in my mind, I didn't know how that all fit together.
Right, that's a good point. So for me personally, this movie is the rare overlap in which a film that's seen as one of the greatest of all time, I also totally agree. Like, you know what I mean? Like, when we watched Seven Samurai or A Fistful of Dollars, it was like, I get it. I don't really like it. It's not for me, but I understand why it was revolutionary. But Judgment Day is an excellent story. It's got great performances. I think my favorite aspect of it specifically is the bond between John and the Terminator, the T-800. I think that's the secret ingredient which is missing from a lot of the sequels.
Yeah, 100%.
Because that's quite touching, and we were talking in Terminator 1 about how it's great to get a quote-unquote bad actor to play a robot. Do you know what a robot learning to love would sound like? Like a bad actor trying to act.
Well, I can't do the voice, but I would show you.
You know, like it would sound like someone who's not very good at acting, but is trying, and that's how he comes across in this movie.
Well, the thing is as well is that like because I keep saying, like, and I have been at work being like, guys, Terminator 2 is so good. And they're like, yeah, we've known for like 30 years. But I keep saying, like, it's one of those things, like, it has everything, but it doesn't actually really have like a romance. It's kind of like a bromance.
Well, the first one's a romance. So this is more something, the father-son story.
Yeah. But it's I don't know, there's something fresh to that whereas like the original Terminator has a little bit of the like, oh, hot dude comes back in time and meets up with hot girl, guess what's going to happen? Whereas this is like, it's the learning to love kind of thing, and that's such a like rich building something out of nothing kind of thing, and really like this film belongs on the Mount Rushmore of blockbusters next to Jurassic Park and
Star Wars,
yeah. Just the first one.
No, I agree. Yeah, I think it's really beautiful. I love that there's the scene where he tries to teach him to smile, and he does a real goofy bad smile. So if you haven't seen this movie, there's a part where John Connor's crying, and the Terminator is like, "Why are you crying?" And anytime I do a wacky voice, it's to avoid doing an Arnold Schwarzenegger impression, just if you hadn't figured that out. And he's like, "Shut up, I'm just crying." And then the line at the end of the movie, because the T-800, after killing the T-1000, realizes he has to kill himself as well so that the technology is erased from human existence.
Yeah.
As he does it, he says, I nearly did it. he goes, "I now know why you cry," which has been memed to death, and it is a silly phrase to hear Arnold Schwarzenegger say.
That, but I'd never heard that before the movie, no.
Oh, wow. I think that's an excellent line and such a sweet moment, and it's fucking good filmmaking, and it's fucking good writing, and it's good acting, maybe accidentally, but it's good. and I think that's really special, and it's such an emotional film. It's got such a heart to it that is, like, completely gone in all of the sequels, and no one really talks about the heart of Terminator 2 when talking about why it's good. I think they talk about it quite superficially. I think people like this movie because it's got cool action sequence, which it does, and it's got big set pieces and stuff, but at the core of it is this beautiful story that captures anyone watching it. I watched this with a friend of mine and she's not really that into movies in general. She's not real. She's not really into that movies in general. She's certainly not into big hulking blockbuster action movies. I think because Sarah Connor's such a fucking awesome female character and kind of like the template for that. I wish there wasn't a template for having the basics of a cool character be female. And the fact that it's got a genuinely touching story, I think that's what attracts people to this from all walks of life.
I would say, because this feels like one of the things that people are going to comment, is that Alan Ripley from Alien is probably more the template, and I would say that Sarah Connor's kind of like the. But
who directed Aliens?
McG.
So yeah, I think this is really good. At the time of its release, with a budget of 94 to 102 million, Terminator 2 was the most expensive film ever made. Richard, do you know what the current title holder for that is now?
It's Pirates of the Caribbean 4.
It's Pirates of the Caribbean 4, the most forgotten movie to have ever existed.
Yeah,
I can't believe that's still it.
Like, if you look at the progression of it, it's overtaken every few years, and then in 2011 it just stops. And that's the last one. There is like the Hobbit trilogy is the most expensive
joint
film production
ventures
ever made, but it was done back to back, and when you split it over 3 films, same with Infinity War and Endgame. But yeah, that's insane.
This is just as insane as finding out that the highest grossing animated franchise of all time is Despicable Me.
Yeah.
Like, both these titles, which you would think you would be able to guess what the answer is, are these ones you would never guess. You would never guess that. I was like, Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides is the most expensive movie ever made. And then I was like, okay, so what is it adjusting for inflation. So I scrolled down, and it's still Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tide, adjusted for inflation and not adjusted for inflation.
Yeah, that's insane.
What a waste of money! No one knows about that movie anymore.
Because like Tangled is one of the most. It's in like the top 10. I'm pretty sure most expensive films ever made, which is crazy.
Yeah, at least that's good.
Just animated.
At least Tangled.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Terminator 2 is significant for this podcast because it's widely regarded as being one of the best sequels ever made, as both a standalone movie and as a marked improvement on the first film. In a podcast about a year ago, we gave the title of Best Sequel to Spider-Man 2.
And
Terminator 2.
Monsters
and
Unleashed.
Scooby-Doo 2, Monsters Unleashed. Terminator 2 is a worthy contender for that title now that we've both seen it refreshed, as adults. The last time I saw this was 2015, I think. I remember my power went out at the house in the middle of the country I was living in, and all I had on my computer was a downloaded version of Terminator 2 for some reason. And so I watched that to while away the hours, and I was like, hell yeah.
Nice. It is definitely one of the better sequels ever made. One of the better films ever made.
Yeah. So the idea for the plot of this film actually began with the development of the first, with the then revolutionary liquid metal Terminator being originally planned for the main antagonist, that Kyle Reese is, and Kyle Reese was going to be the good Terminator. The bad Terminator was going to be a liquid Terminator. They couldn't do it, so it got jiggled around, and then
it does feel like one of those like fulfilling a promise made by the first movie, and like this is what they really wanted to do for the first one. Yeah,
it's taking that first film's scrapped concept, essentially, because I don't know if we mentioned this, but Robert Patrick's T-1000 is made of liquid metal, so he can move through walls and impersonate others and kind of fall apart without dying.
And it's a great, it's one of those great things of like taking what the limitations of 1991 special effects are and using that to your advantage, because it's like, like liquid metal in real life looks kind of like weird at low poly count. And then it's like, okay, what's the most realistic looking thing we can make? And then it's like, because in like Desolation of Smaug, when there's the liquid gold and it looks like shit, but it's like, you expect better from a film in 20 whenever that came out, but 1991, it's like this must have been mind-blowing at the time, because it still holds up because it's not trying to do anything better than what it can do.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was lauded as being the most ambitious use of CGI
100%.
At the time of release. So the decision for the T-1000 to be disguised as a cop has been brought up a lot recently. You alluded to it before. This is a quote from James Cameron from a 2010 biography where he explained, "The Terminator films are not really about the human race getting killed off by future machines. They're about losing touch with our own humanity and becoming machines, which allows us to kill and brutalize each other." He says, "Cops think of all non-cops as less than they are, stupid, weak, and evil. They dehumanize the people they are sworn to protect and desensitize themselves in order to do that job." And this film, Terminator 2, actually released a few months after the, have you heard of Rodney King, the African-American kid who was beaten to death by members of the LAPD. The incident, which sparked riots and mass protest, was being filmed by an amateur cameraman named George Holliday. A few months before Holliday filmed the King beating, he captured some footage of Terminator 2, the crew of Terminator 2, filming at the same location.
Yeah.
Isn't that unsettling?
Yeah.
And I'll bring this up
although
now,
I guess if you looked at it, you could probably, like, any film shot in the United States is probably also the site of a violent police beating.
That's true. So I'm not laughing at that because it's funny. I'm laughing at that because it's sad, and I don't know how to deal with a devastating truth. So I'll bring this up now because I didn't write it down. I'm worried I'll forget. So the main Terminator is dressed as a cop in T2. In Terminator Dark Fate, the main evil Terminator is dressed as a border security agent for a lot of it. I suspect for similar reasons in these times,
Yeah.
So, one thing I love in the story is the Miles Dyson story, the guy who accidentally creates the apocalypse, creates Judgment Day. And I like that he's not a bad person. He's just a visionary who doesn't understand that he's creating. Like, it would be so easy to make him an unlikable character, but they don't. I think that's really cool. He has a family, and it's quite Last of Usian when Sarah Connor goes to kill him and discovers he has a family, and she struggles, and eventually they decide to team up to take down Cyberdyne together. And he does die in the battle, which is sad. Another thing that's in the battle is what I think is the best I'll be back in the series. Because, as I said, the best I'll be back of all time, potentially.
I don't know. Expendables
2. So it's right in the middle of the final battle, and they're essentially cornered, and the Terminator just busts out the door and looks at them and says, "I'll be back," and that's that's cool, he's going to go protect us and save the day. Not knowing, presuming that line wasn't spoiled in trailers, which it very may well have been.
Yeah.
Imagine you went to Terminator 1 in the theaters. He says, "I'll be back." It's crazy. It's such a cool line. Everyone's running up to him. The line becomes synonymous with the celebrity, the cult of personality that is Arnold Schwarzenegger. You go to Terminator 2, you're loving it. You're having such a good time. Then he looks at the characters and says, "I'll be back." You'd lose your fucking mind, Richard. It'd be so fucking cool. And it'd be a Thor has two hammers. No, a cap wielding Mjolnir moment. You know what I mean? I think that's maybe one of the reasons why it's considered so good is that these things that have become such culturally important since the first one are paid off and revisited and honored in
because
the
it is a long time between sequels. It's people would have been waiting for a long. People would have gone, half a decade thinking they were never going to get a sequel.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it is. I do have a couple of minor nitpicks of this film.
Oh,
one is a little bit of a nitpick. The other one is an idea I saw thrown around that I thought would have been cool. So the climax of this film has Robert Patrick's Terminator. It's just sidetracking on Robert Patrick. I've seen clips of him, running and all this stuff, and he's terrifying. But then when you just see his face, and he's just talking to people, he's got such a cute little baby face, and it's really. It creates this interesting thing because I guess, you are part of you is supposed to see a cop as a protector, and then he's being this nice baby face kind of young looking dude. But then, obviously when he's barreling down, he's got hooks for hands, and he's wearing a police uniform, but also, the whole thing fits as well. But anyway, in the climax of the film, he's holding Sarah Connor at about to kill her, and he demands that she call out for John. But they've shown us earlier in the film that he can imitate people's voices perfectly. So why doesn't he just do it? And then moments later, he becomes Sarah Connor anyway. And so it's it's this weird kind of.
It's not anything particularly hinges off that, though.
I think that's probably where it loses the 7% on Rotten Tomatoes. But the other thing as well is that I saw you talked about paying off the first film and whatnot, but I saw apparently one of the original ideas that was thrown out for being too confusing is that the T-1000 would have been played by Michael Biehn. I don't know how to say his last name, but who played Kyle Reese in the first film. So it's they send back this. They somehow get a copy of Kyle Reese and sent him back to kill John Connor, and that could have could have been quite a fun reversal of the whole thing. But I think ultimately would have been too confusing and just been too much of a rehash of the first film. But it's a cool idea.
That climactic fight scene you're talking about,
yeah,
that's the best climactic fight scene I've ever seen, I think.
Yeah.
Specifically the location of it is exhilarating. They're in what, like a steel mill? Is that what it is? So there's liquefied metal hanging out. And it all takes place over like rotating gears and cogs, and it's like the dream location to set your final showdown. So I really enjoy that.
I forgot to do this for the first film, but I've got a couple pieces of dumb IMDb trivia if you're interested.
Tell me them.
So the first film, and this is something you might have to go to IMDb to discover this about a film that came out in 1984, but it was filmed in 1983. That's all it says.
Wow. Do you know that is technically a piece of trivia though?
Yeah.
It's just dumb.
Yeah. And in this film,
like
many people have often stated that Robert Patrick's performance as the T-1000 terrified them. Like, what's the source on that? Like,
he is good. Robert Patrick had the very difficult job in the early 2000s of replacing David Duchovny in the X-Files. He's the male agent in the last 2 seasons of the X-Files.
That's interesting. I had no idea.
Refused to return for any of the reunions. And same with Terminator, I guess.
And he's in Spy Kids.
Is he?
Yeah. Let me just find out where he is.
He's in Wayne's World.
Yeah.
Where he plays the Terminator.
He's Mr. Lisp.
Okay. I don't remember.
He's also in Last Action Hero. There's like, they go to the police precinct and it's like all of these wacky comedic duos. So like one is an animated cat voiced by Dan DeVito, and it like gets paired with like a sassy black woman, and so it's like they're creating all these like spin-offs. But Robert Patrick as the T-1000 is there.
Oh, nice. Yeah, his career's probably got a lot of mileage off that role specifically.
Oh, 100%.
All right, well, Richard, now it's time to move on. How many years later? 13, 12 years later to Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines in 2003. Do you know who directed this one?
I can't remember.
Jonathan Mostow.
Oh.
A name I looked up to find out what else he directed, and I didn't commit to memory anything that he did direct, so therefore it's probably not very interesting. What do you think that Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines has on Rotten Tomatoes?
I feel like it's still fresh rated, even though
Yep.
it is seen as an inferior sequel, but it wouldn't be very fresh.
No.
I'll
give you a clue. It's a very funny number.
420.
Yeah, dude.
69.
It's 69% on Rotten Tomatoes. Can you tell me and the audience what Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines is about?
Let me just pull up the Wikipedia page. So John Connor is like living off the grid. His Sarah Connor's been killed. It's 10 years
Well,
since...
she's died of leukemia.
Yeah.
So I guess she has been killed, but
Yeah.
by leukemia.
And so now, of course, there's another Terminator that's coming back. This one, though, is a lady.
Yeah, dude.
You know, there's the famous story of James Cameron pitching a sequel to Alien, where he like came in and wrote on a whiteboard the word alien and then wrote an S and turned the S into a $sign, and they were like, yep. It's like somewhat Jonathan Mostow came in and just like wrote Terminator on the board and then just drew a crudely drawn set of boobs, and they were like, yes.
If only the production of Terminator 3 were as simple. Would that it were so simple as just that.
But yeah, because there's like, it's on our Instagram actually, and it's the amount of people that told me this was the only thing they remembered about this film,
including me.
Yeah, including you. So the female Terminator,
the TX
or the Terminatrix, comes back, and she's obviously naked, but then she gets her clothes, and then she gets pulled over by a cop, and then sees a Victoria's Secret billboard and then enhances her own chest area in an attempt to get out of the interaction with the cop. Although it's kind of just made out like she's like, oh, that looks good. It's not really like...
Yeah.
It doesn't really connect the dots. Anyway, what's going on with John Connor is another Terminator is sent back, the Arnold Schwarzenegger one, to protect John Connor and his future wife, Kate Brewster.
Catherine Brewster.
Yeah.
A name they want to be just as iconic
as Sarah and John Connor, but it's
Connor,
not.
Yeah.
So anyway, this whole film is... just trying to stop Judgment Day.
Because they didn't stop it in the last movie, they only postponed it.
Yeah, even though they
revealed in this movie.
Yeah. But essentially the whole thing is like it's a race against time or whatever, and then they get to Skynet. Because they're like, oh, if we'll go to Skynet and we'll shut it down because Skynet's this big machine. They get there and they find out that Crystal Peak, which is the place they're going, isn't like the core of Skynet that they can blow up, but it's like a fallout shelter designed to protect the high-ranking officials, and that Skynet isn't a physical thing that you can just turn off. It's like it's a software that's been uploaded to cyberspace and then becomes self-aware, and they fail, and Judgment Day begins, and the film ends with the start of a nuclear holocaust, essentially.
So in reference to what I said before about the final 4 films all trying to be the third movie, but take different approaches, I want to sort of dissect that with the remaining 4 films. And this one is literally the third film, so it's just a standard third part of a story threequel, which, considering it wasn't aware that the other films would all try to decanonize it, it's relatively gimmickless. It's just the third Terminator movie.
And it's one of those things, if James Cameron could have come back and made this film and have the same like log line, and this could have been great. Like it's the thing. Jonathan Mostow just doesn't get it. And it's like,
neither does Arnold Schwarzenegger.
But I was kind of like, I was genuinely like kind of a little bit shocked by the ending. It's like, obviously Judgment Day is going to happen, but you expect happy endings. And I was like, oh shit, like that's actually like kind of a cool place to end your film.
I see what you mean, but I think that Terminator 2 perhaps intentionally shot future sequels in the foot by ending it with not only preventing Judgment Day, but because you've prevented Judgment Day, you've prevented Terminators from being invented. So you couldn't just do a Terminator does another thing and keep the Terminator aspect. You've got to link it to Judgment Day. And I think the idea of postponing Judgment Day is just a fucking bummer. It just takes the breath out of the second film.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
I don't think this is especially terrible. The performances aren't very good, and the story isn't particularly interesting, but it's not that bad.
It doesn't hook you in remotely the same way the first two do.
No.
I didn't really care for the John Connor in this film, or
no. I do think he's the closest they've ever cast to Edward Furlong out of the many actors who have played older John Connor. Yeah, Nick Stahl. And Claire Danes is also in this movie as Catherine Brewster. Who else is in it? Oh, the TX is just played by someone who did not achieve stardom from this movie. Like, so that's a bit sad for her.
But of course, Arnie's back, which means time for some randomly placed useless statistics.
Oh,
this is our second franchise in a row which introduced a character in 1984, killed them in 1991, and then brought them back in 2003.
Oh my god! Is this
and also a character that was created based on dreams in 1984, and then killed in 1991, killed in 2003, and then has one of the main characters in the 2003 film, who isn't the one that was created in 1984, go on to star in a reboot of the franchise in 2009.
You need to explain. Can you start using nouns, please?
So Freddy Krueger and the T-800 were both created in 1984 and 1984 films, Nightmare on Elm Street. And The Terminator. And then in 1991, we had Terminator 2 Judgment Day and Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare, which both killed off those characters. And then they were both brought back in 2003 for Freddy vs. Jason and Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines. However, they take another main character who isn't Freddy Krueger or the T-800, which is Jason or John Connor, who then in a reimagining of the franchise, because in 2009 we get Terminator Salvation and Friday the 13th.
Jesus Christ, man! Are you okay?
Do
you know what year it is now?
This was discovering that the 1984, 1991, and 2003 connection was I was just praying to God that you hadn't figured it out.
Not at all, dude. No, well done. Yeah, wow, that's awesome. That's great. So, I think 3 movies is too long to talk about something without showing it.
Yeah.
That's one of the big problems I have with this movie. When you talk about Judgment Day and the post-apocalyptic future for 2 movies, the third
one
movie
of them is called Judgment Day.
Yeah. The third movie is when people start going, oh man, I wish we were seeing this. you know? And at one point in the film, the T-800 explains that he was sent from the future by Catherine Brewster to protect her and John, but that it was after he, the Terminator who's talking right now, exploited John's connection to his particular model and killed him. He talks about sometime in the future, John Connor met a T-800 and was like, I can't kill this Terminator, it's my buddy from Terminator 2.
Yeah.
And then that Terminator killed John, and then that Terminator was sent back and is the currently was, reprogrammed for good and sent back.
Right.
I feel like seeing that scene happen would have been stunning. You know, he talks about it and it's like, that's a scene. That's an absolute scene. I want to see this happen. Please stop talking about Judgment Day. Show me a movie set in Judgment Day. Which they heard my preemptive cries for the next one, but we're not up to the... I know that'd be a great segue. We're not there yet. I've got so much to say about Terminator 3. I also feel like this film is too sad. It's too sad for its own good. It can be sad, but the characters and the story does not reflect the true sadness of
it. It's a bummer just seeing John Connor, the leader of the Resistance, just get trapped in a cage at a vet that he was trying to get drugs at.
Yeah. And that's a great point. Yeah, and another one is to just reveal Sarah Connor died of leukemia in 1997 after all she'd fought through is I get that Linda Hamilton didn't want to return, but it's Sarah Connor, man.
Yeah.
It's Sarah Connor. She died of leukemia. She fought so hard and then she dies of leukemia the same year she would have died from Judgment Day.
Well, not that there's an inherent weakness to dying from leukemia, which it feels like is what you're
No,
implying.
of course not. It's a weakness in the storytelling, is what I'm saying. But I think the biggest kind of fucking hell, why aren't you characters reacting like normal people, is Catherine's fiance gets killed by the TX. And it's made worse by probably one of the worst examples I've ever seen of characters seeming to not care about a loved one dying. We talked about this recently on, I think it was the Freddy vs. Jason episode. After seeing a facsimile of her soon-to-be husband try to murder her, but it's actually the Terminator disguised as her husband, and then learning that he was actually killed by her, maybe 6 hours later, she just starts batting her eyelashes at John Connor and flirting with him and embracing their future together. That would ruin your life. And this film...
Well, certainly your day. Yeah. If not your life, your day.
Yeah, it takes place over 2 days, and it's fuck! You went from being a no-name veterinarian with a future with this guy to being one of the lone survivors of an apocalyptic event in 2 days. You're handling this very well, and you don't see the insanity that would really happen to someone in her character, and it's not Claire Danes' fault. I think it's the contrivances that the story needs, compared to how rich and full the emotions in T2 are from all the characters. I think this is a really bummer road to take. What do you think?
I agree.
Edward Furlong, who played 12-year-old John Connor, if I didn't mention that already, was signed on to Terminator 3 but dropped out and was replaced with Nick Stahl, as Furlong was in the midst of Macaulay Culkining himself. He had a severe substance addiction. That's probably too mean.
I don't know, yeah, that you're giggling furiously at it.
I feel bad. I improvised that. My improvisation skills are too dark.
He's Edward Furlong as well. If you don't, he's like in American History X is like his other big role.
Ah, true.
Yeah.
Linda Hamilton turned down appearing in the film as she felt her character was unnecessary to the story. She said, "They offered me a part, I read it, and I knew my character arc was complete in the first two, and the third one, it was a negligible character. She died halfway through, and there was no time to mourn her. It was kind of disposable, so I said, no, thank you."
Oh, that's interesting. She doesn't come back when her character's disposable to the plot, but she came back for Dark Fate.
Yeah, exactly.
Spoiler alert.
So despite having the longest gap between Terminator sequels, so it's 12 years, Terminator 3 actually initially started development in 1995 with James Cameron initially on board, which surprises me because it really does seem like he made Terminator 2 sequel-proof by ending Judgment Day.
Yeah.
But there you go. After several years of production companies dissolving and being acquired by bigger ones and the rights of the franchise trading different hands, including at one point Cameron and Schwarzenegger considering buying the rights themselves, because apparently those dudes are just good friends now. Can you imagine them like hanging out, having a beer together?
Yeah.
Cameron bowed out of the project in favor of solely focusing on Titanic's post-production, because we're going Titanic. The time, a wise move for his career. Schwarzenegger originally didn't want to do the film without Cameron, but came around eventually with Cameron's blessing. This is a quote from James Cameron. "I just felt as a filmmaker, maybe I'd gone beyond it. I really wasn't that interested. I felt like I'd told the story I wanted to tell. I suppose I could have pursued it more aggressively and gone to the mat for it, but I felt like I was laboring in someone else's house to an extent because I'd sold the rights very early on." To me, knowing that James Cameron did Terminator 2, Aliens, and Piranha 2, The Spawning, it's probably what makes me the most interested in seeing his Avatar sequels, because this guy has aced the sequel formula 2 out of 3 times. Yeah. I looked up the Rotten Tomatoes score for Piranha 2. It's like 6%. So I'm very curious to see how he tackles a third part of a story. You know? Interested. Terminator 3 probably has one of the most intriguing deleted scenes of all time.
Hey. I'd seen this long before I'd seen the film.
Right. So I don't know when it's supposed to play in the movie, but it's like a flashback to when the T-800 is being made, and it's like it's sort of like a how it's made kind of documentary thing, and you see Arnold Schwarzenegger jogging on a treadmill, and he talks to the camera and he's like, "Hi, I'm Sergeant Candy," and that is actually how he sounds, and not me avoiding doing an Arnold Schwarzenegger impression. And he's got like this thick, rich Texan accent, and talks about how he's the model, the primary model for these robots being built, and these like officers in the Skynet offices, these like technicians, I should say, in the Skynet offices are watching this documentary, and one of them's like, "I don't know about that voice," and one of the technicians looks at the guy and says, "We can fix it," but he says it overdubbed with Arnold Schwarzenegger's voice, which I cannot do. This is a hard concept to explain without doing Arnold Schwarzenegger's voice.
It is, which leads me actually to dumb IMDb trivia.
Oh.
So, I would have said, fun fact about that scene, that the, "Hi, I'm Sergeant Candy," is provided by Samuel L. Jackson.
I've heard that before.
But according to a piece of dumb IMDb trivia, it says this is all it says. It doesn't even throw out the possibility that it was. Samuel L. Jackson was not the voice of Chief Master Sergeant William Candy in a deleted scene meant for the film. The voice actor is unknown, but it is clearly not Samuel L. Jackson. Like, now imagine if you didn't know that it was rumored to be Samuel L. Jackson. Like, you could replace that with any actor. It's like, because it doesn't even say, some people think it sounds like him. It's like, well, you know, it's not Ray Romano. It doesn't sound like him.
I'll be back. Come with me if you want to live. Deborah! Ah! Hasta la vista, baby. Yeah, so whenever I remember that deleted scene, I'm like, that's a cool scene. They should put that in there. And then whenever I watch it, I'm like, they probably made the right call not including
But
this.
at the same time, it's like, I think, I don't know, maybe it would have felt like a betrayal, but the part of me wants to see a Terminator 3 that is true to the tone of that deleted scene, you know? That's a little bit self-aware and it's having fun with it. Whereas, T3, it's trying to be this, it's trying to be on par with the first two, but it's clearly not.
So the last thing I've written for the Terminator 3 section is things I liked about this film, and they're bullet pointed.
Yeah.
So because there's not many of them, so it's like, here's the things I do like. I think a sexy female Terminator feels like an inevitable and valid idea. I think that's probably what would happen.
It's where they did it in Transformers 2.
Yep, there you go. I do think she's over-sexualized, though. There's a lot of unnecessary tongue movements that she does. That's like, you don't need to do it this way.
It's just talking, AJ.
Now she'll like lick blood and lick it very sensually to track the blood. I love the subversion of Arnie's Terminator. So every movie he turns up naked, time travels to the past, and he turns up naked and he steals his clothes from someone. And this one, he gets his clothes from a male stripper at a hen's night. So he's just taking his clothes off anyway. I think that's a great idea. And then he puts on these like ridiculous sunglasses. That's a good joke.
Again, that's like, it give me a whole film that's that tone. Like,
I agree. When you said that, it did make me think about that. I think some of the action is fine. Like, it's cool. There's a car chase, and
my
it's like,
favorite things about Terminator 3. Some of the action is fine.
That's what I've written. And when Arnie's Terminator kills the TX at the end, he does it by grabbing her leg. She's been skinned, so she's just a robot now. And he grabs her and pulls out one of like his exploding batteries and like shoves it in her mouth or something as this door's crushing them both. And he says, "You have been terminated," it's a fun one-liner that we haven't really heard before.
Yeah, I think there's a reason people don't quote that though.
It's because they're doing a podcast where they've sworn not to do the accent. Do you have any more thoughts on Terminator 3?
No.
Well, let's move on to Terminator Salvation in 2009. So 6 years later, directed by Mick G. What do you think this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
Like 42?
33%. Lower than I think it probably deserves, and lower than I think the general consensus seems to be for this film.
Interesting.
But what is this movie about? What is Terminator Salvation about?
So this is supposed to kind of pay off the future war. Like we saw a little bit of it at the start of Terminator 2. You see like a little bit of the future, but so this is following John Connor, who's like the leader of the rebellion. He's the resistance fighter. And
played by Christian Bale,
who had a great time working on this film. And then you also have Anton Yelchin as young Kyle Reese. And then it's kind of just like a war movie. It's very clearly supposed to be the first in like a new series.
Yeah. So, in the what kind of threequel is this explanation I've got here, while it doesn't specifically ignore Terminator 3, it barely acknowledges it. Bryce Dallas Howard plays Kate Connor, who is John's wife, who is maybe supposed to be Catherine Brewster, but she's Kate, and they don't actually call her Kate in Terminator 3. So, I guess that's how they have their cake and have their Kate and eat it too. Oh, that feels gross now. I'd categorize this as Terminator's distant sequel or its new direction sequel. It's the kind of sequel which reboots the tone and setting, but not the story.
I think like they're definitely, while this movie isn't fantastic, I think it was a really good idea. And I think that, again, if Terminator 3 had been good and ended on Judgment Day, as it did, it was directed by James Cameron, you have this perfect trilogy that, ends with this in this quite a dark place. This is how you continue it. Like, you flash forward, see a character we've heard a lot about. Like, I mean, we've seen John Connor, obviously, but we've never seen him, like, in full war mode. And then, do another trilogy that's, like, the future war. I mean, it doesn't particularly interest me, and I've seen people be like, what we want to see is, like, what everyone's gagging to see from a Terminator sequel is, like, the actual future war. And it doesn't actually interest me that much, but I think there definitely is a place for Terminator Salvation or, like, this idea to be followed through.
And it feels, as you say, it's so tonally different, and it's giving people what they've supposedly wanted, and it's such a different and fresh interpretation to the series, as opposed to Terminator 3, which felt like an attempt to continue the first two. This is made especially unique because Schwarzenegger isn't really in it. We'll get to that later.
His likeness is in it. Because he was governor of California at this time as well.
Yes, he was. While most Terminator 3s were trying to start a new trilogy, this feels like the most earnest and appropriate attempt to do so. Like, the next three, this one and the next two, are like, was supposed to be the start of a new trilogy.
Yeah.
But it's like, this is the only one that it makes sense that it was trying to do that.
Yeah. Like, this is supposed to be the start of a new trilogy, whereas the other two are just supposed to be the start of three more films, you know?
Yeah. The production company who headlined this project went into bankruptcy not long after it was made, though. And that is why the trilogy was abandoned. Do you think that the ending of Terminator 2, they need some other goal that isn't stopping Judgment Day, just so it doesn't destroy the like impact of every sequel coming after it? Like, do you want to like?
I'd rather leave Terminator 2 as it is, and and not have the sequels. Like, than
would you like to make Terminator 2 worse so that the bad sequels can be slightly better?
Yeah.
So what do you think of Terminator Salvation?
I don't know. Like I said, like it doesn't interest me as much, but like just by default, like the setting. But you could make a good film in this setting. I mean, essentially, like something like Edge of Tomorrow. You know, it feels like what this should be. You know, but yeah, it's just kind of like it just meanders from one thing to another, and I never really cared about it like super like that much. Yeah,
I tentatively rank this above Terminator 3. I think it has all the same problems, including the fact that Judgment Day still happens, but it's I think that
this is a better idea than 3.
While Terminator 3 feels more like a Terminator film, I appreciate that we're finally doing the sort of what we've been saying already. So even though the Terminator films, though, even though they've repeatedly broken budgetary records, I feel like this is the blockbuster of the series. That's such a stupid thing to say because Terminator 2 and 3 were the most expensive movies ever made.
That's really stupid, yeah.
But this has so many A-list actors in it. The music is by Danny Elfman, and it uses...
And it's directed by Mick G.
And it uses a lot more modern digital effects, whereas the previous 3 felt like they were pioneering, whereas this one is like, in this blockbuster landscape, this is what a Terminator film looks like. This one isn't as pioneering as the other 3.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it is like you're just making a futuristic war film and stealing the good fortune that the Terminator name gives you. And it's like, and part of me is like, there's a place for that. That's fine.
And there are so many. So Christian Bale, Bryce Dallas Howard, Sam Worthington, hot off the heels of Avatar, or maybe before Avatar. I don't know.
It'd be, he would have filmed it probably, but this would have come out before it.
What's her name? Tim Burton's ex-wife.
Oh, Helena Bonham Carter.
Helen Bonham Carter's in it.
Common's
in it. Yep. Moon Bloodgood is in it. It's got so many people in it. It's crazy. It's insanity. So other than Judgment Day, having Judgment Day still happen, I think everything else that's wrong with this movie is it's just dumb and uninteresting. The character relationships are whatever. The philosophies it communicates are like faux deep. You know, they're like, what does it mean to be human? Because Sam Worthington. So the story of it is like Sam Worthington is from like our time, but he was a murderer And so
That's right,
he signed away the rights to his organs or whatever, and then all this time in the future, he's now been the basis for like the most human Terminator that could ever be made, because he doesn't even realize he's a Terminator, and that's how Skynet tries to win this time. And he ends up saving the day by donating his beating heart to John Connor, who gets stabbed. So whatever. Sam Worthington.
All right, Terminator 5.
Arnold Schwarzenegger's facial likeness is used in this film. There is a T-800 that has a brief appearance. You can see pictures of it on our Instagram. His facial likeness was recreated with CGI. Could you tell?
I mean, it doesn't look that dissimilar from like the rubber mask.
No, that's true. That is true. A mold of his face was made in 1984. That was made in 1984, scanned to create the digital makeup. Schwarzenegger gave his consent to appear this way due to being unavailable as he was serving as the governor of California at the time. And one of the weirder parts of his story. And
so it's a very dramatic reveal when he comes out of the shadow and you see the body and you're like, oh shit, it's going to be him. I recognize that shadowy area where a penis would be. Although if you watch the original film in HD, you do see his penis.
Oh, you see his sack.
Yeah. But anyway, that apparently if they hadn't gotten his likeness, John Connor would have just shot the face off it before you see it.
Which, if you turn into a joke, would maybe be...
Yeah.
All right.
Like the end of Shazam when Superman appears. And it's very clear that Henry Cavill's not there, but... Yeah.
McG met with series co-creator James Cameron, and although he neither blessed nor denigrated the project, Cameron told the new directors he had faced a similar challenge when following Ridley Scott's Alien with aliens. So that was James Cameron's contribution, when he was like, yeah, it's pretty hard, eh? The original ending of this film was going to have John get killed, and his image would have been kept alive by the Resistance, grafting his skin onto Marcus, who's Sam Worthington's character, his cybernetic body. Marcus would have then murdered Kate, Barnes, Kyle, and Star. I don't know why. I forgot to look up the context of that, because he's a good guy by that point in the movie. However, this ending was leaked on the internet, and so Warner Bros. Neville Longbottomed it and changed the ending, probably for the better, I think. And of course, the last thing I've got written here, this is the film where Christian Bale had his famous angry tirade recorded. We can do Christian Bale impressions.
Yeah.
Would you like to
Oh, good for you.
Oh, good for you. So funny.
Look, you and I, you're a good guy, but you and me, we are done professionally.
Oh, it would break my heart to hear that. Imagine, so if you don't know about this, some like lowly scrub on the set of Terminator Salvation touched something he shouldn't have, and Christian Bale...
No, he was walking it was the DOP was walking in the background shot.
Was it the DOP he was talking to?
Yeah.
Oh my god, I didn't know that. So he yelled at him.
Shane
and
Hilbert.
Got real mad, and it got recorded and released. And it's very like if I'd made friends with Christian Bale, and then not only did he get angry at me, but he could sense he was hurting my feelings, so he said, "You're a good guy, but we're done professionally." That's like, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. You know, like that's so much worse. And a lot of people I've read, though, have said that Christian Bale is actually pretty justified in his anger and that.
Well, it's one of those things like Christian Bale is obviously the kind of actor who gets like super duper into character, and you know you don't want to break him when he's in the zone, kind of thing. They said that afterwards they resolved it completely, and you know that they worked together and whatnot. But I think it's just like. He caught him in the zone, and he just caught the brunt of that, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, good for you. What don't you fucking understand?
It's fucking fantastic.
It's horrible to listen to, but it's also great. And there is a great remix called Christian Bale's At Your Party, which I love, that turns his lines into lyrics, and it's very funny. Nice. Have you heard this? Have I played you this before?
No, I don't think so.
It's like one of the lyrics is like, So it's about just Christian Bale turns up at your party
Yeah.
and ruins it. And one of the lines is like, now he's flirting with your unattractive niece. Her name is Cassandra, but he's calling her Patrice. He bought a frozen pizza and he sells it by the piece, screaming, "What don't you fucking understand?" It's so funny.
That's great.
Look it up. It's great. All right. Any more thoughts on Terminator Salvation?
No.
Let's move on to Terminator. That's the theme music, which I love. I love the Terminator theme.
It goes, let's move on.
It evokes so much emotion. It's such an emotional track, I think. Terminator Genesis, or Genesis if you're feeling cheeky, because that's how it's spelled.
Yeah, that's how you said it on a
SYS.
soda pop shirt, and I was like, what the fuck?
This came out in 2015, directed by Alan Taylor, who directed Thor the Dark
Yeah,
World.
which makes this our second franchise to have its worst film directed by Alan Taylor.
What do you think it has on Rotten Tomatoes?
I know you don't think it's the worst film, but like,
How do you know that?
because I saw your ranking.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, that's right, bitch.
I told Rowan, and I was like, he better not tell Richard. I'm saving this for the podcast. Not even thinking for a second you would look at my Letterboxd account.
That's so funny that you were like, I have to confide in Rowan about this.
Well, I nearly told you, but I was like, it's good content. I'll save it. How good is this content now that it's been delivered?
Yeah. Like 20...
How old are we?
27.
27. Yep, okay. What is it about?
So I guess it's kind of like intended to be like a soft reboot, but...
People say that. It's not really. It's not really intended to be a soft reboot. You see the events that lead up to Terminator 1 from the future's perspective. So you see Kyle Reese get sent back in time, but then things change. It's essentially the plot line from... It's very hard to explain what this movie's about.
Yeah, I was going to just let you do this one.
I don't know why I took the burden off you. And what does Wikipedia say it's about?
Yeah, so we see Kyle Reese go back as he's leaving the future, and this is the first time we actually see time travel in the series.
Exactly. Yep.
Like you talked about, show something after there's like 5 movies it took them to actually show it.
These are talking notes. I'm glad you picked up on them too.
So yeah, he gets sent back. We see like you said, what we talked about in the first film. He arrives in the past. The timeline has been like altered somehow, in that a T-800 was sent back even earlier to Sarah Connor's childhood in the 70s, and she's kind of grown up with him. He's credited in the film as the Guardian, Arnold Schwarzenegger returning to this, not just his likeness.
Pops, they call him in the film. Pops.
Yeah, Pops. And then John Connor shows up. He's been sent back as well, and spoiler alert for the trailer of Terminator Genesis, it's revealed past the halfway point of the film that John Connor is actually a Terminator as well.
He's been turned into one.
Yeah,
he hasn't always been one.
And then, it's fucking,
So Genesis refers to what Skynet gets called when Skynet gets stopped. Like so the Terminator timelines kind of imply that Judgment Day is an inevitability, and if you stop it, something else will crop up in its place. I'm describing this far more eloquently than the films do. But so Genesis is the new name for Skynet, and it's an operating system.
Yeah, that like will connect all your fucking
social
devices,
media is evil, that kind of thing. It's 2015. We want it. We want these stories, Richard. So what kind of threequel is this? This adopts, as we said, the soft reboot approach, where the canon reset is almost worked into the text of the film itself. So the reboot nature of it is part of the story. This one also mostly directly ignores Terminator 3 and Salvation, and is actually referred to as Terminator 3 by James Cameron himself after seeing it, in a very interesting special featurette that we watched today, where he talks about how good he thinks the film is. However...
Yeah, I saw that a wee while ago. He's since stated that he doesn't like any of the sequels he's not involved in, and he's just said it as like a favor to Arnie.
That's exactly it. A Skydance, who productioned the film, produced the film, Skydance executive said, "It's not a traditional remake, nor is it a continuation or a sequel, nor is it exactly a reboot. In a sense, it's a reimagining. Our sequel's different to your sequel."
Yeah. Skydance,
so
more like Skynet.
What do you think of this movie?
It's not very good. And this is one of those films that... having no attachment to Terminator, when the trailer came out for this, I was like, that looks fucking bad. Like, Terminator fans must be livid.
Yeah.
And again, I've got a few gripes that I want to like specifically mention. Some are just like dumb little like things, like the fact that in 1984 they've just built a time machine, and then they get to, is it 2017, and they're still working on it, with like. And then also the fact that, and this is like a problem in a lot of time travel movies, is that they go, they've got a fucking time machine, and they go, we have to leave right now so that we can get to either 1997 or 2017, and we can't do both. And it's like, just go to 97 and then wait for 20 years if it's that important, you know? And then they go, no, we have to go to 2017, and we only give ourselves 2 days. And it's like, give yourself a month. You've got a time machine. And then the other thing as well, and this is kind of, I guess, a bigger talking point. So the character of John Connor is revealed to be a Terminator. And so I feel two ways about that, and they directly contradict each other. So one is that, like, it's dumb to see this character be the bad guy for so long. That this character that we've cared about for, you know, all these movies leading up to now. On the other hand, I have no attachment to Jason Clarke's portrayal of John Connor.
Yeah.
Like, this supposed to be this big dramatic reveal that, like, oh my god, they're going to have to fight John Connor. It's like, I don't give a shit about this dude. Like, and so that really works. Like, if it had been... If we'd had the same person like we had with Arnie play him through the last 3 movies, that would be like a jaw-dropping reveal. And it would betray the character a lot more. But, like, and so it doesn't feel like it works either way, whether or not you're supposed to care about him that much. And also the fact that Jai Courtney plays Kyle Reese, like, the discount Sam Worthington, who's already a discount actor. And also, and I've been saying this to you all week, but watching the first Terminator, I was like, this dude, Kyle Reese, looks like Sam Claflin, who is, he's in Hunger Games Catching Fire, and he's in Me Before You with Emilia Clarke. He's a good actor. He seems like a cool dude. He was at the height of his fame in 2015. And he looks exactly like Kyle Reese. And it's infuriating that they didn't cast him and that they went with Jai Courtney.
And they don't talk about it in the film, but the reason why everyone's played by different actors is supposed to be something about different timelines and different sperms. Create, you know, going into the egg. But ignoring that, imagine being Edward Furlong and you grow into Nick-style Christian Bale and then to Jason Clarke. Like, it's such a bummer. No offense to I like Jason Clarke as an actor, I guess. I don't dislike him. But Christian Bale. You were Christian Bale, now you're Jason Clarke. Who would you say is your favourite John Connor?
Probably Edward Furlong, just because it's like the best movie.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's such a weird comparison to compare Edward Furlong to Christian Bale as well.
Yeah, it's more interesting to see him as a little kid than like a hardened soldier.
Yeah, I agree. So I actually didn't think this movie was especially bad. I maybe was in a good mood when I watched it, but at the point of watching it, it was my favorite part 3 so far.
Right.
Dark Fate is inarguably better than Genesis, so spoilers for Dark Fate. But at this point, I was like, oh, whatever. I enjoyed the characters. I thought the story went in an interesting place, more so than Salvation. And I think it was cool that we were finally seeing missing information again. So this is the first post-Judgment Day world we see. Well, like, we see Salvation was all set in the post-Judgment Day world, but we see enough of it in this film that if Salvation didn't exist, I'd be like, this is a substantial enough.
The itch,
Yeah. But as you said, it's also the only time we're shown time travel from the other side. And until this film, time travel almost felt like just an afterthought, like Terminator's time travel. And it's like, okay, that sounds like a pretty significant technological advancement. And
that you can just
no one is talking about.
Cobble together in 1984 with scraps.
Yeah, like it's, but good point. But it's such a huge thing that's not gone into in any of the movies up until now.
Yeah.
And so I appreciated seeing that. And I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm a sucker for meta storytelling, but it's cool to see all these characters and the story intertwined with what we've already seen and changing things. It's not in terms of quality it is, but in terms of idea, it's not too much of a far cry from Avengers Endgame. Like it's, revisiting classic moments. It's, paying homage to them while also changing them. And like at the start of the film, the Arnie from the first film approaches the street hooligans to ask for their clothes, and then current Arnie shows up and they fight, and it looks like shit, but it's a cool moment. I don't know. I liked it. I think that I also thought that the cast, there's J.K. Simmons is in it. Yeah. That's cool. J.K. Simmons is a cool actor, and I enjoy seeing him. And this was just after
Whiplash. Yeah, he's the first Oscar winner to appear in it, because Christian Bale wasn't an Oscar winner when he did the first one. Did the fourth one.
And to be honest, I like watching James Cameron's what he says about the film. I'm like, I don't know. I agree. Like, I didn't think maybe I was just in a good mood, but I thought like Schwarzenegger playing with the character in a fun way is cool. I liked the father-daughter dynamic between him and Sarah Connor. I can understand John Connor being evil as something people would hate, but it's not bad enough for me to throw the whole thing out.
Yeah. I think it is dumb that it was in the trailer. That was the only thing I knew about this film.
Yeah. I do think this film is begging for some comedy when late 40s John Connor hangs out with mid-30s Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor, and no one remarks about the strangeness of, I'm 35 and this is my 45-year-old son, like nobody...
Right.
It feels like this is an elephant in the room that needs some kind of tension release, and it's not given to you. So, I don't know. I thought it was an interesting sequel. I thought it was very interesting. It's somewhat to its own detriment. It's a more complicated idea than what the last two part threes have been.
It doesn't feel like the kind of movie that's supposed to draw a new crowd, whereas like Salvation really felt like it was like, you don't have to watch the other ones. You like what you understand from pop culture about John Connor, Terminators, you can just start here. Whereas this is like, it's dumb for fans of the franchise, and it's nonsensical for non-fans of the franchise.
Yeah. Nah, fair enough. I guess I just didn't... I don't know. I was like, it's not... I didn't think it was that bad.
It's a very mid-2010s faceless blockbuster. Like, how like 2016 was like shit for films? Like, this would have just fit right at home in the like bland kind of blockbusters that we got. That, and in the same way that like even though it came out the same year, that Salvation feels like that kind of like gritty, Hurt Lockery kind of thing. And there's just something about the aesthetic of like especially this film that it just feels so boring. I remember seeing set photos. It was like the first photo of Arnie back as the Terminator in a long time. And it was a shot of him standing with the others. I think it was the EW photos that they like released as promotional material, and it was the main characters like standing on this overpass. And I remember thinking, "Fuck, that looks just flat," and and then it just looks like that in the film, and like the whole film was just flat and boring, and yeah.
Well, would you have preferred it if it were directed by Rian Johnson, Denis Villeneuve, or Ang Lee?
Yeah.
They were all approached to direct it to take over direction from Justin Lin until Alan Taylor was selected.
Justin Lin would have been great.
Yeah. But it's hard to imagine. It's what I was saying before. Like, imagine you're Denis Villeneuve or one of these visionaries, and you get given Terminator 5. And you make it and everyone hates it. It's like, I tried, man.
Yeah.
I'd
love to see a Terminator 5 or 6 or 7 that, has elements of like Blade Runner 2049. And, Dark Fate does have some elements of 2049. Mackenzie Davis.
There you go. A crucial element. So, like Salvation before it and Dark Fate after it, there were a couple of sequels planned, as well as a TV series based on this film, had it done well. J.K. Simmons' character would have had a more significant roles. The sequels would have also filled in the blanks on how John Connor became a machine. Emilia Clarke, who played Sarah Connor in this film, I don't know if we mentioned that, said she would not return for any sequels, however.
Yeah, apparently this was a horrible film to work on.
She said that Alan Taylor, who directed a lot of Game of Thrones, was unrecognizable.
Yeah. This film was shot at the same time as Fantastic, the Fantastic Four reboot, and they shot next to each other, and the production on this film was so bad that the people who worked on Fantastic Four, look into the production of that film, made jackets that said, "At least we're not on Terminator."
I feel like Fantastic's probably a worse movie than this, though.
Undoubtedly, but also you look at the production of
you look so angry that I
Josh Trank smearing feces over the walls of the trailer he was given by the studio. Look this up. This happened. Was a better production than what we don't know about Terminator Genisys.
Any more thoughts on Terminator Genisys?
I do have some dumb IMDb trivia.
Nice.
So this I've got two. It was thought that Robert Patrick, who played the T-1000 in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, makes a cameo as a man at the hospital reception area in the hospital fight between Terminator Pops and John Connor, and is seen talking on a mobile phone. However, Patrick confirmed that, and this is a quote, "I am not in the new movie."
Very cool, thank you, IMDb.
And this one I like because it's like a little kid found out this piece of trivia and then ran home and is out of breath and is telling it to their parent.
Okay.
Arnold Schwarzenegger's favorite moments for the Terminator franchise are when the Terminator tries to be human because it's something funny and not action and violence, and the most important thing to the Terminator is to blend in, and when he does, it fails miserably, and that always gets a big laugh from the audience.
I agree. I think that is when this movie's at its best, as the white-haired Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator. I think that's a cool place to take the character, even though he's playing a different character in every movie.
Yeah.
It is a cool place to take that character, I think. And there's this cool kind of, I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, it's not really paid off, but I know it is paid off. There's like an underlining like through line in this film about the Terminator being old but not obsolete. But then, so John Connor and Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor have to take a time machine to get from 1984 to 2017.
And they have to be naked.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Yes!
Pops can't go because his metal arm is exposed and the machine will rip him apart.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is the first time we see time travel. We're just told, no dead thing can go through it. You have to be covered in living tissue. But we find out in this one that it's like, because it's like a microwave and it's like how it treats metal in the microwave.
Yeah, and which is how they killed John Connor's Terminator.
And Pops has to sacrifice himself. Yeah.
So he has to wait just all those years and find them again when he's old and grey, and like they're like loading ammo together, him and Kyle Reese, and his hand craps out and he's like, "I'm old," and Kyle Reese is like, "Yeah, but you're not obsolete." And it's cool. It is bare minimum.
Isn't the hand crapping out in Dark Fate?
No.
I did watch this.
I mean, I'm sure the old Terminator is in both of them. But I just thought that was cool, and it is paid off because in the end, there's sort of the story that Kyle Reese doesn't believe that Terminator and Sarah Connor's relationship is legit because he's just a robot. But then at the end, he sacrifices himself to save them by pushing the Terminator, John Connor, into the time machine. And he says, "Oh shit, I nearly did it."
That's 1 point to me.
No, I just said one word. He looks at Kyle Reese and says, "Take care of my Sarah." And he calls her My Sarah, and then when it explodes, he falls into the liquid metal and comes out improved. And he's like, "I'm improved now."
Yeah, well, because also he comes out, he calls everyone by their full name throughout the whole movie. That's the first time he doesn't call her Sarah Connor.
It's it's minimal but effective storytelling, and it's not like
It's
not like
minimum.
it's screwed up. It's not like it's badly done. It's just the stuff surrounding that isn't maybe the best. Anyway, now it's time to move onto Terminator Dark Fate 2019, directed by Tim Miller. Do you know what it has on Rotten Tomatoes? Forgot the tune.
Like 70?
70%. The watermark of it's all right. It's good.
Yeah.
It's a good movie. 70% is a good movie. It's not a great movie.
Yeah.
And you can skip it in cinemas. But
Yeah.
it's not bad. What is Terminator Dark Fate about?
All right.
I said it was in 2019, right?
Yeah. You sung it, actually.
Okay.
So
That's right.
in the opening moments of this film, we see. So this is a classic ignoring sequels movie. Jim Cameron is back as a producer, and the story, I think, was him. It takes place after Terminator 2. A few years after that, John and Sarah Connor are just chilling out at a beach when a T-800 shows up and kills John Connor, and because it's revealed that they just sent back a bunch to random points and times, which is like, of course you would do that if you have unlimited use of a time machine. So then it's now 2020, and a Terminator. So a Terminator, which is another one that's like halfway between like nanobots and liquid metal, is sent back to murder Danny, who is the new kind of John Connor of the franchise, who is like the leader of the human resistance, and then also a cybernetically enhanced or an augmented human named Grace is sent back at the same time to protect her. And then Sarah Connor shows up. Doesn't affect the plot that much. Like I think you could easily take her out of the film. And she's been killing Terminators because she's been getting texts that say, like, there's a Terminator here, come in, do it for John. And then she finds out that those texts are coming from Carl, who is the Terminator who killed John, who's been living a life and essentially became human, and has lived a human life.
Learned to feel regret for what he did.
Yeah, and he
grew a conscience, as they put it in.
Yeah, and he's now makes drapes. And then it's your typical, they get like detained at the border, and it's Danny is Hispanic as well, worth mentioning. And so there's this whole that you hinted at earlier, the like immigration kind of subtext to it. And eventually Carl sacrifices himself to destroy the Rev 9, which is the advanced Terminator. Yeah.
So what kind of threequel is this? Well, similar to Salvation, it is, I would say it's a distant sequel because it's got
Mackenzie Davis in it.
Yeah. It's got an actor we haven't seen for 30 years returning, and Mackenzie Davis, two elements that must be included in a distant sequel.
Yep.
So similar to Terminator 3, it also feels like a more on-brand continuation of the tone, which we haven't seen since Terminator 3. And similar to Genesis, it explicitly decanonizes any sequel after 2. It's the epitome of all three of those attempts and is considered to be the most earnest of these doomed third chapters. Cameron himself said, "We're pretending the other films were a bad dream or an alternate timeline, which is permissible in our multiverse." What do you think of Dark Fate?
Okay. It's probably better than the other sequels other than 2. But I don't know. I think it just kind of didn't deliver. Again, it's like the flat direction from Tim Miller. Also, it's one of those movies that I wrote a version of it in my head as I was watching it. and I liked that one better.
Do you want to share that now?
I do. So I think it should have been. So they're protecting Danny the whole time. Grace has been sent back. There should have been a twist that, and all you have to do is take out a couple of scenes, change a couple of lines of dialogue, and then at the end of the film reveal that Danny isn't the next John Connor. She's the next Miles Dyson, and she was actually the one that was supposed to start. What's it called, this Legion in this movie, and that,
right,
and
the new Skynet.
You have Sarah Connor inadvertently helping the bad guys, and she's actually like realizes that, oh shit, I've been protecting the assured destruction of humanity, and like, because it seemed like there were parts where it seemed like that was what was going to happen. You could even do the memories Grace has of protecting humanity and being sent back by Danny or meeting Danny are like implanted memories, because she's this new type of not quite Terminator that we haven't seen before. And you could easily like rewrite these things, make the bad guy, who, as you mentioned, is a border security agent, make him not as like murdery, just very like man on a mission. And you could totally like flip the script and make what I think would be such a more intriguing movie that I think a lot of people would be talking about.
That's such a good idea, Richard, because that also, for the first time since Terminator, or in any of the Terminator 3s, it goes, Judgment Day's still going to happen, but it's about that, which is something I've written for my Continue the Franchise, is like, and I'll just say it now because I have another idea, is like, if Judgment Day is an inevitability, so to reiterate, making Judgment Day still happen after T2 is a fucking bummer. Yeah. Okay, that's my problem with it, is that it ruins the ending of the best film in the franchise. Yeah. That's my problem with it, right? But if you make the third one acknowledging that it's an inevitability and dealing with that, because they don't even talk about it. They don't even talk about how fate seems to want it so that a machine takeover will happen. Yeah. They never go, man, we can't escape this. No matter how many times we've tried or whatever we've done, it's still like Judgment Day still happens. They don't acknowledge the depressing nature of that. Yeah. But I really like that idea, because it becomes
it's a story
about
reason
the fact that that's a depressing.
Yeah, it's like there is a force ensuring that it still happens, and that force can be stopped.
Yeah, there you go.
Because also it's like, and I think that maybe it's one of those like binging. It's a not made to be binged kind of series, but by the time it got to Dark Fate, I was kind of like, oh yeah, two people coming back, one's to protect them, one's to kill them, and it's like, it doesn't. Like after 1 and 2, and it's clearly they thought, okay, well, what worked about 1 and 2? You have this formula, let's just do that over and over again. By the time it gets to this film, it's like, and that's why I was like, oh, cool, there's a twist coming, because that's the way you make this film interesting, and then they didn't.
Yeah, that's a good point, man. Well, despite all that, I do think it still is pretty inarguably the best Terminator 3. I don't know, there's just a thing, a je ne sais quoi to it that is immediately like...
A je ne sais quoi?
A je ne sais quoi, which is immediately like, I haven't seen this universe since 1991. Where am I? Yeah. I liked it. I think seeing Edward Furlong's John Connor killed at the start was rough and a bit of an emotional hurdle to jump over.
Well, again, that's like you're taking a John Connor that we're actually attached to and doing something with it, rather than just Jason Clarke.
Yeah. But I like that we're getting a sequel which deals with the other aspect of T2, and instead of saying, Judgment Day still happens, though that does happen in the film, it brings back... Because Terminator 2 isn't about protecting John Connor. Terminator 2 is about stopping Judgment Day. Like, once you've stopped Judgment Day, you can just kill John Connor.
Yeah.
And Terminator 3 at its best, Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines at its best, deals with what would happen to someone who was told they were destined to save the day, and then their future was stopped, right?
Yeah.
And what I was reading that... I think it was Tim Miller was saying, like, John Connor in this timeline could have grown up to be like a pencil-pushing accountant, not important at all. And that there's kind of a sadness to that.
Yeah, maybe. I do think as well it's worth mentioning the so the opening scene with the 1984 aged, or 1991, I guess, aged Arnie and Linda Hamilton and Edward Furlong is the best de-aging or like recreation of a younger version of Edgar I've ever seen.
I've ever seen. I'm glad you said that. And maybe it's because I was watching it on a TV.
That probably does help. But oh my god, they all look incredible. Like it feels like they shot this 30 years ago and saved it for this.
I agree. And I say this being, canon on the podcast, I'm very sensitive to de-aging stuff. Like I can always tell. With this, I was genuinely like, that just looks like Edward Furlong.
Yeah.
He's the most impressive one.
Well, and also I think they did a lot of smart things that like Edward Furlong's only really shown from a distance. Arnie's got sunglasses on, so they don't have to worry about eyes, which are like obviously being the windows to the soul, one of the hardest things to get right.
I thought that bringing Linda Hamilton back for the first time since T2 also reminds you that she's kind of what's great about those first two films. Like people think it's Schwarzenegger or John Connor, and it's like, well, it's kind of this badass lady like surviving against all odds is one of the most appealing parts of those two movies as well.
Yeah, I do think bringing her back is one of those things that, like I said, she's not like
she should have been integrated.
Yeah, she should have been integrated better. And it's one of those things like, hey, don't worry, the Dark Fate is going to be rated R, and it's like just because Linda Hamilton says the F word a bunch of times, and it's like, okay,
yeah. I did like that that this film is also mostly about three ladies, one of who is a person of color, going on an action adventure together.
Yeah, this is one of those because it didn't do very well at the box office. This is one of the right wing's classic get woke, go broke kind of movies.
Maybe they're right, dude, because this always happens.
Captain Marvel only made $1 billion. Chicks. Anyway, it's funny. I saw a Reddit comment that was like talked about James Cameron clearly has views on immigration and stuff. They said like ICE, the like border security and whatever, are like the bad guys in this film. And someone was like, how are they the bad guys? Like they're just doing their job. Like they shouldn't have been trying to enter the United States illegally. And it's like, yeah, maybe the fucking them doing their job, making them the bad guys is like, take a second look at it,
You hate to hear about that people saying that kind of shit. I think that it's got a pretty cool "I'll be back" in it, where Linda Hamilton says it earlier on in the film. I thought that was fun, and Schwarzenegger is very good in this movie. I think he's very funny. He plays quite a. There's a sorrowness to him, having like lived with this burden of realizing what he did years after he did it. And when he says goodbye to his family, he's telling them about it because he has a family now, and he makes them leave, and he says he's talking to Sarah Connor about it, and he said, and I told them I won't be back. And it's like, that's maybe too cheesy for this movie, but I appreciate the nod.
Yeah. And also because another line that's in every film is "Come with me if you want to live," but in this film, it's "If you don't come with me, you're going to die in the next 30 seconds."
But it does. I know, but that doesn't feel like it's a reference to "Come with me."
100% is, I think.
I know, but not. It's not.
It felt very obvious to me. It took me out of the film. It was so obvious.
That's what I mean. Is that it takes you out of the film because they like, why try dress up that line? Just say the line.
Yeah, exactly.
Just say the line.
It's like, you're not better than this. Like, you think you are, but
it's
you're
like
not.
in Amazing Spider-Man when they had to rejig with great power comes great responsibility, and your father believed that if a person had the power to do something, they had a responsibility. Anyway. So James Cameron famously was involved in this sequel. He was brought on as producer, returning to the series for the first time since T2. He agreed to produce the film on the condition that Schwarzenegger be involved, which is like, what?
Yeah,
why is that the condition that Cameron is like contingent on? Tim Miller felt that audiences had lost hope in the franchise during the last like 3 sequels, and he was hoping that James Cameron being involved would be like a seal of quality. He said that he was hoping that it was going to be handled at least in a way that the original filmmaker would want. That's a fair assumption, but I think his comments on Genesis also prove that James Cameron knows how to sell a movie as much as he knows how to write a movie, and those are two very different skills. So there was I don't know if you remember, there was quite a lot of publicized drama behind the scenes with this film because Tim Miller and James Cameron butted heads. They disagreed on a lot.
Yeah, which is because Tim Miller left. He left Deadpool 2 to make this movie, but he left Deadpool 2 because he butted heads with Ryan Reynolds so much.
So one of the things they disagreed with was that Miller wanted the humans in the future to be losing against Legion, while Cameron felt they should be winning, which seems like such an afterthought of a thing to be arguing about. But Miller said Legion is so powerful, the only way to beat it is by going back in time and strangling it in the crib, while James Cameron says, what's dramatic about humans losing?
What?
I don't know what James Cameron's talking about.
Yeah, Tim Miller's right.
So that was one of the things that was apparently publicized that they butted heads on. The decision to kill John Connor came from Cameron as well, who wanted to surprise audiences who had become invested in the character's mythology. This is a quote, "It's like, let's just get this right off the table. Let's pull the carpet out from underneath all of our assumptions of what a Terminator movie is going to be about. Let's just put a bullet in his head at a pizzeria in the first 45 seconds. Cameron said that John's death serves as a springboard for the story to show Sarah's ultimate trauma, from which she only begins to recover right at the end of the new film. She's driven by hatred, by revenge. Her badassery comes from a place of deep hurt and deep pain." And this was met with controversy. This is easily the most complained about thing from this film. I've got some critic reviews here. Fred Hawson from ABS CBN News wrote, by deciding to lose John Connor early on in this one, made the emotional heart of the first two classic Terminator films stop beating as well. Richard Roper argued that killing John Connor ruined what the previous two films established. Even though Dark Fate tosses aside the third, fourth, and fifth entries in the series, like a Terminator disposing of a hapless cop, it also undercuts the impact of the first film and the follow-up, which is one of the 2 or 3 greatest sequels of all time. First, they get rid of John Connor character in an almost casual fashion. Matt Goldberg of Collider felt that the opening did irreparable damage to the legacy of Terminator 2 by rendering it pointless. Which I kind of understand. I don't necessarily think it's ruins the I think I go back
it's a bit of a middle finger to the to it a little bit.
It's the same as the little girl dying at the start of Alien 3. You can't make your beating heart immediately die of your last film immediately die because you're throwing out thematic resonance there.
Have you written down what Edward Furlong thought of it?
Yeah, he said, they smoked my ass. That was the role. I did it for a day. I shot for a day. And yeah, we did some CGI. They paid me. So I mean, it kind of bums me out because I'd love to do a whole one and make a shit ton of money. I would love to do more, but we'll see what happens.
That's great. He gets it.
He gets it. He also wants to make money for the first time in years.
What's he up to these days? Can we get him?
I don't know. I think he's just hoping he'll be cast in the Terminator sequel that ignores every sequel since 2. So in July 2017, Cameron said that he was working to set up a trilogy of films and supervise them. The intention was for Schwarzenegger to be involved, but also to introduce new characters to pass the baton. Following the film's underwhelming performance at the box office, sources close to Skydance told The Hollywood Reporter there are no plans for future films. Mackenzie Davis recently, as this past week,
in the last couple of days,
said you'd have to be pretty stupid to make a sequel to Terminator. Dark Fate.
Yeah, you have to be insane to think there's demand.
So any more thoughts on Terminator Dark Fate?
Yeah, Terminator Dark Fate. I messaged you while I was watching it and said, you could make this a lot better with very few changes.
Yeah, I mean, if this was the only Terminator 3 to come out, it'd be it's not as good as the first two. But it's
yeah. Well, yeah, if they actually just hadn't made anything since 1991, this would be a really interesting sequel. But it's almost like it's trying too hard to be different to 3, 4, and 5. I think that if you were actually to just make the third Terminator film to ever come out in 2019, it's it'd There is like an inherent problem with making Terminator films now that you're now approaching the years that are talked, and we've surpassed like several of the years that are talked about as being the distant future in the first couple.
So how would you rank the 6 films? Do you have that in mind?
I think there's somewhat of a like objective or like
agreed upon
ranking, which would be 2, 1, 6, 3 and 4, 5.
So,
and I don't disagree with that. I
go 2, 1, 6, 5, 4, 3, and when I ranked it that way, I was like, so Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, is my least favorite one, and it's not that bad. And that's when I realized, like, this franchise isn't that bad. Like, it goes from best movie ever to underwhelming.
Yeah, I think as well, and I mean, we'll talk about more when we rank that franchise at the end of the episode. But it's one of those ones like similar to Fast and Furious, I guess, or like even the Freddy and Jason, that like having bad entries makes the story of the franchise more interesting. So it's like, even though the overall average quality of the films, varies, the fact that there are bad ones, and it's like, oh yeah, like being able to talk about a franchise, it's like, 1 and 2 were great, but 3rd was shit. It's like that to me is like a good franchise because,
well, that's the podcast, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's more to talk about.
Yeah, and why we love covering franchises on this podcast that are like interesting stories in their own right. I'm not talking about the narrative of the films, but the story of the franchise is kind of why we do this. And this is a very you need to talk about Terminator when we one day write the book on film franchises. Terminator blazes a trail that's maybe not a particularly enviable one, but one nonetheless. So we talk about titles a lot on this podcast, and so let's get some basic stuff out of the way. No, I don't like that they drop the from the first. Well, it's more I don't like that the first one is called The Terminator, and the other ones are called Terminator. First one should just be called Terminator, but who cares what I think? Whenever I say something,
I think I like The Terminator and then dropping the.
I don't. How dare?
It's like The Incredibles and Incredibles 2.
I don't like that either. I'm glad that T2 isn't known as T2 in any official capacity. I thought it was before doing this podcast.
T2 is saved for Trainspotting 2.
Yeah. Terminator Salvation and Terminator Genesis don't have colons. So they are just a sentence. We talked about this with, what was it recently? We talked about this on. Was it one of the Friday the 13th or something like that? So it's like, it's not Terminator Salvation, it's Terminator Salvation.
Yeah, it's
Terminator Genesis. So that's kind of fun.
Like Terminator Salvation feels like it's intentional, but Terminator Genesis just feels like they forgot to put one on the poster, and then they're like, oh yeah, I guess this is technically the title.
Well, speaking of Genesis, I just wish they'd spelt the word Genesis. It's just classic.
I don't know. Like, Genesis is such a boring subtitle for a film.
Yeah, okay, we're already starting from that level. Sure.
Yeah, but I like that it's a little bit different, and that, in the world of the film, there's a reason it's spelt like that. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just because your inherent like lack of ability to instinctively know how to pronounce things.
I'm looking forward to the end of this sentence.
Is like, you're like, well, it's size.
I don't think it's size. I just think it's like saying fan four stick.
Well, because it's clearly it's like it's generation system or something. It's something system. Yeah. And so it's like, it's a obviously that's what it is. However, Terminator Dark Fate, I fucking hate that title.
It should be Terminator No Fate. No fate, but it's
just stupid. It just sounds stupid. When it was announced as like, oh, the next Terminator film is, and because it's one of those things, like, again, I had no attachment to the Terminator franchise. I don't care about titles as much as you do.
You're coming around though.
I do, but obviously you're more. But like when they announced that it's called Terminator Dark Fate, I was like, well, it ruined. It's deliberately trying to upset the pattern, I guess. So, like, Salvation and Genesis are both one-word subtitles, but Dark Fate, I was like, that's just such a lame,
Oh yeah.
stupid title. It just sounds dumb. And then I was like, okay, surely it's justified in the film, but it's just like, oh, the film's vaguely about fate, and it's not a good fate, so it's Dark Fate. And it's just so lazy, and it's like it's what like a year 9 would call their short story in English class. Like it's I hate it. I actually fucking hate it.
Wow.
And it genuinely brings down the film for me. And it like because of the title, it makes the entire aesthetic of the film just boring.
Well,
and it's and Tim Miller's flat direction doesn't help. That like
it should have been called Terminator Legion, right?
Yeah. But again, it's just a boring, like,
well,
subtitle.
They're all boring, Richard. How's this?
Yeah.
Terminator
Salvation.
Salvation.
Just call it Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines.
Terminator Salvation, The Future Begins was originally the title for Terminator Salvation. Not Terminator, The Future Begins. Terminator Salvation, The Future Begins. Presumably the trilogy would have been the Terminator Salvation trilogy.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, I can't think of what I would call Terminator Dark Fate. Terminator Mexico, like Narcos.
Yeah. All right, well, now we're going to move on to one of our final segments of the show, which is Continue the Franchise, where we pitch a sequel or a way to continue the franchise. But before we do that, Terminator is one of those franchises that has had plenty of attempts at sequeling over the years, as evident by how many third installments and failed starts to new trilogies it has accumulated. There have also been multiple video games. There's a very significant theme park ride that comes up when you're researching this stuff. And most notably,
it's actually like it's filmed by
James Cameron.
Like directed by James Cameron, like the interstitials of it.
Yeah.
It's at I almost went on it at
oh wow.
Universal Studios Japan. However, I didn't care about Terminator at the time, and I wouldn't have understood it anyway because it's in Japanese.
Most notably, though, there was a live-action TV show called Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles, which ran for 2 seasons in 2008 and 2009, and serves at yet another attempt at a third Terminator chapter, taking place after T2 and. It's definitely not considering the other movies in its timeline.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it only had one other movie at the time it came out, but it's Lena Headey is Sarah Connor,
which and what I think is a genuinely pretty cool piece of trivia is that both Lena Headey and Emilia Clarke, the two heavyweight actresses from Game of Thrones, have both played Sarah Connor at some point in their careers.
Yeah,
I think
which is
cool.
like you have to feel a bit sorry for Emilia Clarke that imagine like in 2010 you're told like you're going to be the star or one of the stars of Game of Thrones, Terminator, and Star Wars, and you'd be like, oh my god. And now in 2020 you say the franchises Game of Thrones, Terminator, and Star Wars, and they're like, oh god, they all suck.
So Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles is set 4 years after the second film, and it's about Sarah, John, and Cameron. Maybe a reference. Who is a Terminator that has been reprogrammed to protect John. They are being pursued by a Terminator named Cromartie, who has been sent back through time to assassinate John, and also by the FBI, who they're also pursuing them, because they believe Sarah is an insane criminal. By many accounts, the series is pretty good and is generally agreed upon as the best of the failed Terminator 3s. Like, I think people want this to be the third Terminator series, like third Terminator movie. So Thomas Dekker played John Connor. As we said, Lena Headey played Sarah Connor, and Summer Glau played Cameron, the new Terminator. Summer Glau, who in 2008, 2009 was a very big name in these kinds of things you'd see at Comic-Con things. So yeah, I would be keen to check out the pilot for film franchise follow-ups, perhaps. In August 2010, it was reported that a new Terminator film was being developed, so this was before Genesis and after Salvation. The new film was not going to be a direct sequel to Salvation, but an animated reboot of the original called Terminator 3000. It would have been shot by Hanover House. However, Pacifor, the owner of the rights to the franchise, had not given official license. And like some sources say, it was like a cease and desist or something was sent, which is insane
Right.
that you can have a cease and desist between companies that understand how copyright works.
Yeah.
But an animated Terminator film feels like one of those things that I could easily, and then we watched the animated one for our film franchise Fornights.
Yeah, like the Animatrix kind of stuff.
So that I'm not opposed to that idea. Terminator, this was mentioned in our Discord this week, but I had already written it down and was so mad when people brought it up at the Discord. It's had multiple mockbusters cash in on its success, including the Indonesian film Lady Terminator from 1988, the 1989 Italian film Shocking Dark, which was called Terminator 2 in certain countries, despite being more of a ripoff of Aliens than Terminator, and of course the 2009 Asylum film The Terminators. Asylum being the Hollywood of mockbusters. Movies that look so similar to real movies that you mistake them for, well, you don't, and I wouldn't, but someone would mistake the Terminators for being a Terminator film. So I have two things I'd like to see in a sequel. One of them I already mentioned, which is if Judgment Day is inevitable, I want to see a sequel that's about trying to figure out how to prevent it from ever happening with the knowledge that it keeps coming up in historical, no matter what you change, it still happens. That's so depressing. Let's figure out a way to nip that in the bud.
Right. So, like, my alternate
your
dark
idea, yeah. I have two. The other thing I would like to see is there is a line in Dark Fate when John Connor is killed. After John Connor is killed, Sarah Connor describes it as he's killed by a machine serving a future that no longer exists. And I thought that was the coolest line in the movie. And that is very intriguing. And I said before about how, because they stopped Judgment Day, you can't just do another Terminator movie because they've stopped Terminators from being created. But this is how you do it. Like Terminator 3, especially if it came out in 1995 or whatever, it should have been about it should have been called Terminators, and it's just about the Terminators that were left over and them avoiding them. That is the only way, and with that you avoid someone being sent back to a guardian and an attacker being sent from the future. You avoid the fact that everyone has a naked person time traveling at the start. It's a shame that it's wasted on an excuse to kill John Connor, because I think I would have rather have seen that movie than Terminator Dark Fate or any of these third sequels.
Yeah.
Do you have another idea, or was you sort of just?
I said to you earlier that off pod that Terminator feels like a franchise that is owed continue the franchise really seriously, which we often don't do. But yeah, I was trying to think of other ideas of where I would want to see this series. One is one is just to do it could even be found footage, but set it on Judgment Day, show us more of society actually breaking down, and even if it's set now and it's more of the Legion or Genesis iOS type thing, how that would unfold. Show us because we actually in Genesis we see the person Skynet, who's played by Matt Smith from Doctor Who, and it's he is Skynet, a film that's them starting to lose and sending someone back, retold from their point of view. Just give another go at Terminator Salvation. Like I said, I understand the appeal for that kind of movie.
Yeah.
And then I was kind of maybe Terminator, if it wants to continue, should just stop trying to be good. Just accept that you've created this iconic villain in the not even as an Arnold Schwarzenegger T-800, but the idea of a liquid metal or the endoskeleton, the metal endoskeleton with the glowing red eyes is such a great character design that maybe you just need to make sequel after sequel every year that just involve it killing a bunch of horny teens that were going to be
Right.
SEAL Team 6 in the future. And like, just accept the fact that you've got an iconic horror villain and just make a bunch of shitty sequels that have like nothing to do, and they rewrite the storyline every time. But Terminator feels like the kind of thing that anyone who's going to take the reins of it is going to try and be super clever and think that they can do something that lives up to T2, which obviously they fucking can't do. And I don't think I actually don't know if it's possible to make a film set now that like to make a film nowadays that would actually live up to T2. I mean, people would have said that about Blade Runner, and then 2049 I think blew the original out of the water. But yeah, the desire to bring Arnie back and to bring a however old he is Arnold Schwarzenegger back and force the older Arnie's like role into the story, like that's to me what it felt like in Genesis. Is like they were like, okay, we've said we can get Arnold back, let's write a story around why he's old.
Yeah, and like it's just, this is a franchise at odds with itself, because the obvious answer is actually just don't make anymore. But people don't want to accept that. And not only do they not want to accept that, but they want to hold on to the nostalgia, and like they want Arnold Schwarzenegger in it. They want all these things that are at odds with
start with a naked time traveler.
Yeah. They're at odds with what should be happening, which is something different, because they want something old. Yeah. It's completely kneecapped by what it thinks it has to achieve each film.
Yeah.
There you go. So Terminator, as a franchise, where are we going to rank it? We have a Letterboxd account, letterboxd.com/cultpopture/list, and then you can go to /FFF-ranking if you want to see what where we've ranked every franchise we've ever done. So this is our 108th franchise according to this list. Some of those are like certain franchises split into two, etc., etc. Do you have any kind of starting point of where we want to rank Terminator?
Like I said before, like the fact that it contains one of the greatest movies ever made, and has a super interesting I want to sit down and explain the continuity to you kind of franchise, you know. I think it deserves to be quite high.
I do too, and I also think that, as I said, I don't think any of the bad ones are actually especially terrible, which sets it apart from things like I don't know, Lord of the Rings, which has The Hobbit dragging it down some. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think,
although the Hobbit is separate on our ranking, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's like if you imagine there's like a tether between those two
rankings.
Yeah. That's how I think of it.
So I think,
is it?
I mean, this is top 10.
Is it?
I would say so. Yeah.
Our 10th, I don't think it is, because our 10th is Mad Max, and I think Mad Max is probably a better franchise than Terminator.
Interesting. I think Terminator is better.
You think it's better than Mad Max as a franchise?
Yeah.
Really? I don't think you're being fair to Mad Max.
Well, Mad Max is like, oh yeah, you got 3 pretty good films, and then one of the best movies ever made.
But that's better than what we've got with Terminator. Terminator is if you've got one of the best films ever made, one that's also really good, and then 4 of middling quality.
Yeah. I don't know, dude. Place it where you want.
No, don't give up. Okay. So at 11 we've got Daniel Craig's James Bond movies, and at 12 we've got The Evil Dead. I feel like Terminator and Evil Dead are quite closely linked.
Yeah.
At below Evil Dead, we've got Kill Bill and The Fast and Furious. Is the Terminator better than the Fast and Furious series?
Yeah, I think so.
Is it better than Kill Bill?
Yeah, I think it's better than Evil Dead.
Okay. I don't think it's better overall as a franchise.
Okay, AJ, you place it where you want.
No, Richard! Would you want to place it above Daniel Craig's James Bond?
I don't want to place it anymore.
This is what we're supposed to do.
Says who?
What do you mean, says who?
Well, no one's forcing us to do this. This isn't our dark fate. This is just our salvation.
There is no fate but what we make. All right, I'm thinking then maybe at number 12.
Cool. Put it there. See if I care.
Right, so it's between Casino Royale, so Daniel Craig's James Bond movies, and The Evil Dead. So it's better than Evil Dead, but not as good as Daniel Craig's James Bond movies. Fuck, it
Casino
probably
Royale
is better than
one of the best.
It probably is better than Daniel Craig's. No, is it? No, they're actually very, very close. I think because when you mix
like Daniel Craig's James Bond, just lows are lower.
You reckon the lows are lower than Terminator? Yeah, no, I would actually agree. Yeah.
Yeah, Spectre's real bad.
Spectre's real bad. Okay, so above Casino. So okay, we're gonna put it. I don't think it's better than Mad Max as a franchise. So I'm gonna put it at 11. So it barely misses out on the top 10.
All right.
Do I have your consent?
Don't ask it like that.
All right, I'm saving it. Well, that took longer. I'm probably going to edit some of this out. It took too long for us to get there. Cool. Okay, it's number 11 on our list of franchises, which leaves us with one final segment before we go to our post-credit scene. You can probably already hear the music playing. And this is our next franchise, which we're going to cover in 2 weeks, which has been voted on our Patreon. They decided what it's going to be. You can go to patreon.com/cultpopture to see what this is going to, to be a part of this. You can
to see before we announce it right now what it is.
So the next franchise we're going to be doing, which you'll be running, Richard, based off the highest voted from the suggestions from our patrons, is in fact the Brave Little Toaster trilogy. Are you familiar at all?
It's one of those films that I know when I watch it, there's going to be a bunch of familiar images.
We'll talk about this next fortnight, I'm sure. It's not a very New Zealand prolific series, is it? I feel like it's very American.
Yeah, it's we had more like
just blockbuster Disney movies.
Yeah, An Angel at My Table.
Once We're Warriors, like.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, well that is the show for this week. Thank you for watching. Sure. I'm not going to correct it.
You did screen record this.
I might make a video out of. That's confusing. You won't want to see what I've screen recorded. It's not very interesting. It's for I was thinking of making a video on how to edit a podcast. Let me know if you want to see this. And I'll know that you listen to the whole episode if you say this. But other than that, you can like us on Facebook. You can subscribe to us on YouTube, the Cult Popture account and the Cult Popture podcast account. We're also on Acast, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, all the places you get podcasts.
You can follow on Spotify, I think.
Yep, you can. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at Cult Popture. Lots of fun stuff happening over on those platforms. A lot more casual than our Facebook or YouTube posts. There's also the Discord, as we've talked about a few times. There's a link to all these things in the show notes. Join the Discord, guys. It has become the definitive way to talk about the podcast and to talk with each other. It's so heartwarming to see friendships being formed within our fans community. And
rivalries being formed.
And you can also, of course, email us at cultpopturemedia@gmail.com. Let us know what your favourite Terminator film is. But other than that, let's get to the post-credit scene at the end of the episode. Richard, I'll be back. We'll be back in a couple of seconds. I thought that not doing an Arnie impression would be a bigger presence over this podcast, but we really just didn't end up doing it.
Do you want to do one now?
Okay, you go first.
Hey everybody, we got a great show coming up for you.
Not every family would defy gravity for you, but mine would, because I'll be back. Okay, everybody, thank you for listening to that episode. One of the worst episodes we've ever done, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yep. Definitely down there with Final Destination.
Why'd you pick that one?
Because I hate it.
Right, well, this is the post-credit sequence, which will be the highlight of this episode, I'm sure. This is a segment brought to you by our patrons over at patreon.com/colepopture, where if you donate $5 or more, you can give us a question or a topic to discuss. And today's question comes to us from Ben Close. He says, hey guys, I'm going to do an old switcheroo and ask something really serious this time. The question applies to both, but possibly more for Richard given his line of work. What? Whatever. I have a line of work too, Ben. I've been working in television for about a year now, generally a 50-hour week, if not longer, and I just find all the time that I feel so mentally exhausted that I don't do anything with my life outside of work, particularly when it comes to working on my own projects and self-development. I typically get home, have some food, and chill out with some form of entertainment delivered by an array of light-emitting diodes. I feel like I don't have the time or energy for anything else. Do you guys experience this, and how do you deal with it?
Right. Very good question, Ben. And I'm glad to talk about this kind of thing because we don't talk about it enough in New Zealand. So I had very similar experience to you. I went to broadcasting school and then did my internship at a production company, which was as a production assistant. And I did that for just over 2 years until they told me, hey, no one above you is moving, so you can stay here if you want. But essentially, you've wasted anything beyond your 6-month internship because we haven't upskilled you in the slightest. But anyway, so I was 50 to 60-hour weeks kind of thing. And I think a lot of people who don't work in TV don't realize like how detrimental to your mental health that can be, and how you can't just say, to your boss, oh, I'm being worked too hard, I need to take some time off. Like I broke my foot, and I was speaking to so my work officially finished at 6 p.m. and the last bus was at like 6:05, and the bus stop was like a 4.5-minute walk away from work, especially with a broken foot. And the woman with ACC was telling me that she wouldn't give me a taxi credit because I could feasibly catch the bus. And I was like, because she said, what time do you finish work? And I was like, well, technically 6. And she's like, oh, yeah, so you're still able to catch the bus. And it's like, well, no, I'm not, because 99 times out of 100, I have to work an extra hour or two late. She goes, oh, but just tell your boss that you can, like, that you need to go. And it's like, well, yeah, I can't actually do that, because it's so much of it is, if you leave early one day, you're just going to have to spend an extra hour or two the next day. Like, it all rolls over. And so around this time while I was working there, I started living by myself for a little bit. And that was when I got to the point where I was really like, I can't keep taking work home with me. And it was like, and not in the sense that I would come home and I would take a prop I was building and finish it at home, but mentally you're taking home this stress and everything like that. And it kind of goes into what Ben's saying here, that like essentially it got to the point where I was like, yeah, this is too detrimental to my mental health. And I made a conscious decision to stop giving a fuck when I wasn't at work. Essentially, if you're in a position where you can't change anything right now, there's like what's worrying about it going to do, So if I'm stressed at work, I have a lot of stuff that I know I have to do the next day. What I would always do before leaving work I would just write down everything I need to do the next day. And then essentially like putting down my thoughts on paper, it often made it look like not as much as I was worrying about. And then it's like, well, I don't need to think about this because it's stuff I can only do in the morning. So stressing about it now isn't going to help in the slightest. And so you can kind of just leave that at work. And then, yeah, when you're getting home, it is really easy to feel like creatively drained, especially if you're working if being creative is your passion and then you're working in a creative field, and then the last thing you want to do when you get home is finally start writing your screenplay or whatever. And yeah, I think you just have to like kind of work on compartmentalizing your life a little bit, where it's like leave work at work and try and really set yourself like what the difference between your like work creativity that you're forced to do and what you're passionate about is, and yeah, just be able to make sure that they don't cross over.
Yeah. Yeah. That's thank you for sharing that, man. I'm a big believer in not making your work your identity. Although I say that's what's right for me. If you really love your job and you're a career person and you want to focus on your career, I don't know if that's what you are, Ben, but then do that. That's fine. Like if you're a teacher and you are really passionate about it, then and you're okay with taking your work home with you, that's all good. Personally, I only want to do what I'm passionate about, and what I'm passionate about is cult popture, and so I want to do that. And so I will do my allotted hours, and then I will wash my hands of it and come home and not think about it. If I'm outside my allotted hours, that I don't know that works for me. And I understand that it might not work for everyone, but that's what I try to do, and I try to not let having a job be the thing that is about me. And I've worked jobs where I've had co-workers who, like, our job or the place we worked was their cult popture, right? And so they treated it the same way I treat cult popture, and they would want more out of me, and I'd just be like, nah. So I would say, it depends how much you like your job. I mean, I'm always a big believer in quitting your job if it's upsetting you to a huge degree. I get really excited when my friends talk about how they're thinking about leaving their job, and I'm like, yeah, man, do it, leave your job, because I think it's one of the best feelings in the world to leave behind a bad situation or a situation you're sick of. And it's not easy because you do have to make money, but I'd say follow your passions, and if work is getting in the way of your passions in a big way, then prioritize. Work out a way that you can leave the job and keep the passion and still get paid, whatever way that is.
And I think you're just referring to specifics in your question, Ben, as well. Is that like, the feeling of mental exhaustion you get when you come home? Like, just think about what reinvigorates that for you, and make sure you are doing that.
Porn.
Because
jacking off.
Yeah, look at lots of porn. No, but seriously, I hope that kind of answers your question. And I think another thing, this is a really long post-credit scene, but it's something important to talk about. What you're talking about with, like, your job being your identity, if this is a problem, not just for you, Ben, but anyone out there listening, I always find that if you don't like what you do, when people ask you what you do, don't, like, so for instance, I work at TVNZ, I'm a video editor. I wouldn't say I'm an editor, it's like, I work as a video editor, because you're not saying this is my identity and I'm tying it to what I do for a living, because you're more than that, and you don't want to let people, I mean, it's different for different jobs, but, like, people shouldn't just compartmentalize you because you say, because I'm an X and that's my identity.
Yeah.